3 million people are having their welfare slashed.
Now that, folks, is an action-packed show. Rachel Reeves today claimed every Briton will feel £500 better off. Do you? Do you feel £500 better off? Do you feel 5 pence better off? Do you feel better off at all? That's the only thing that really matters when push comes to shove. Or are you feeling the pinch? Do you think we're heading for a recession? They call it now the Reeves session. Let us know your thoughts on today's statement. Was there any crumbs of comfort in it for you, your family, your friends, your business? Get in touch. GBNews.com/your say. But now it's time for your headlines, and here's Katie Bowen.
Martin, thank you and good afternoon. The top stories at 3:04. The Chancellor says the Office for Budget Responsibility has halved the UK growth forecast for this year from 2% to 1%. But she also announced that OBR have upgraded their growth forecast from next year to 2029. In her spring statement, she announced final adjustments to benefits changes unveiled last week. She says the cuts will save £4.8 billion in the welfare budget. The Chancellor told the Commons that the global economy has become more uncertain, adding that the UK has to move quickly in a changing world, as she confirmed a £2.2 billion increase in defence spending to 2.5% of GDP. Rachel Reeves went on to say that house building will hit a 40-year high thanks to Labour's planning reforms. And on those changes to the welfare budget, she also told the Commons that the Universal Credit Standard Allowance will increase from £92 per week this year to £106 per week by 2029-30. And in an analysis just published by the Department for Work and Pensions, more than 3 million families will be hit by welfare cuts by 2030. Here's what the Chancellor had to say at the dispatch box.
The Labour Party is the party of work. We believe that if you can work, you should work. But if you can't work, you should be properly supported. This government inherited a broken system. More than 1,000 people every day are qualifying for personal independence payments. 1 in 8 young people are not in employment, education or training. If we do nothing, we are writing off an entire generation. That cannot be right, and we will not stand for it. It is a waste of their potential, and it is a waste of their futures, and we will change it.
Well, the leader of the Conservative Party, Kemi Badenoch, labelled the fallout to the Chancellor's statement as chaos.
I think that it was all smoke and mirrors. I remember the last budget when Rachel Reeves said she was smashing glass ceilings. Now it feels like the roof is falling over all our heads. Inflation is up 2.6% to 3.2%. Unemployment is going up, and it's forecast to go higher year after year after year. There's people's jobs out there. That's terrible. And growth has halved. Even the forecasts which he said were promising are lower than what they were last year. Something has to change. This is chaos.
Well, figures released this morning show UK inflation eased by more than expected last month. The prices of clothes and shoes fell for the first time in more than 3 years, according to the Office for National Statistics. The rate of consumer price index inflation fell to 2.8% in February from 3% in January. The latest figures mean the cost of living is still rising for households across the UK, and inflation remains above the Bank of England's 2% target, but at a much slower rate than in recent years. A record 30,000 migrants have arrived by small boats in Dover since Labour came to power. It follows the arrival of a further 66 migrants this morning who made the illegal journey from France. It's the 8th straight day of migrant activity in the Channel, which has seen more than 1,700 cross since last Thursday. GBNews analysis of the figures reveals that over 30,000 migrants have arrived by small boat in the UK waters since the general election last July. And the University of Sussex has been fined £585,000 by the higher education regulator, the Office for Students, for failing to uphold freedom of speech. It follows the case of Professor Kathleen Stock, who left the university in 2021 after being accused of transphobia for her views on sex and gender issues. The OFS criticised the university's policy statement on trans and non-binary equality, saying its requirement to positively represent trans people and an assertion that transphobic propaganda not to be tolerated could lead to staff and students self-censor. The University of Sussex plans to challenge the OFS findings legally. Those are the latest GBNews headlines. Now let's go back to Martin.
Thank you, Katie. Now let's get cracking, because despite promising to fix the foundations of the economy of today's spring statements, Chancellor Rachel Reeves announced that growth would be halved this year. And joining us now live from Downing Street is GBNews' political editor, Chris Hope. Chris, an action-packed spring statement. Give us all the latest.
That's right, Martin. I'm live in College Green. We're waiting here for other guests to appear on the show for you. But yeah, big news here from the spring statement. It's normally meant to be basically, frankly, a single statement, the actual forecast for growth this year from the Office for Budget Responsibility. But the figures are so difficult for the government to stomach, a lot more has been announced besides. So 2% was the forecast for growth on this year, now down to 1%. Borrowing going up, inflation set to go up. And the other big story here is billions cut from the welfare budget, 4.8 billion. We now have a figure on how many that might affect. 3 million people on benefits. No wonder around Westminster today there have been protests of individuals battling and fighting and chanting against Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves. Why is a Labour government cutting the welfare budget? This is not what many people thought they were voting for with this party back in July. I've been number crunching for you, Martin, by the way, on the scale of this £500 increase in the Office of Budget Responsibility. That's for each person. Looking at the increases going through next week, I think that figure will soon be eaten up by the changes in cost of living. For example, energy bills up £111 from the 1st of April. Council tax £109. Water bills £123. It goes on. Car tax up by a fiver. Broadband average up by £36. TV licence up by a fiver. Bus fares up by £110 on average. Rail fares 4.6%, let alone freezing the income tax thresholds, of course, which bring many more into the high rate of tax. But with me now is Helen Whately. She's the Shadow Welfare Secretary. Helen Whately, how do you react to 3 million people being hit by these cuts to benefits?
I'm really shocked by what I've heard from the Chancellor today. I think she's letting the country down. She's got the economy into such a bad place with the budget that she did last autumn, and as a result, in a panic, they're making these cuts to welfare. Now, I've said that we need to do welfare reform and we need to cut the growth of the benefits bill, but they're going about it totally in the wrong way. It's a worse world, it's panic cuts, and it's going to hit many people with disabilities really hard, and in fact put around 200,000 people, including 50,000 children, into poverty.
You say that, but you fought the election last year on cuts to benefits. What was your plan to cut benefits?
So we fought the election on the grounds of reform to welfare. So what you need to do is you need to reform it and make sure those who can work do work, but those who really need help should get the help that they need, and where those people can work, be supported into work. But that's not what we've seen in this emergency budget from the Chancellor. We're just seeing cuts, and actually the only change there is to people getting into work is an increase in unemployment, a fall in people working.
So therefore, will you vote against the benefit cuts if you don't approve of them?
Well, let's see what the government puts in front of us in terms of votes. But my reaction to today is one of huge shock and disappointment.
Is austerity round the corner? It seems that way.
Well, I mean, as I just said, I think the problem is that what the Chancellor has done and is doing is meaning that growth is going to be lower, and growth has halved compared to the forecast that we were expecting before. Unemployment going up, borrowing costs going up. This is everything going in the wrong direction. And reading the analysis from the OBR, there's a lot of talk in that about falling business confidence, and we know about businesses cutting jobs, making people redundant. This is all going the wrong way. What we need is a strong and growing economy, and as I said, on the welfare side, we need reform to get people into work, not just cuts.
Of course, they're blaming the mess you left the economy in. They're saying the £22 billion black hole, that's why the tax increases have come, and the world is more of an uncertain place. The Trump was not mentioned, was he, in the debate? But that loomed, I think, over the global uncertainty.
Well, of course, the Chancellor would look to blame, well, we've seen that she's looked to blame everybody else rather than take responsibility herself. But actually, the financial trouble she finds herself in and therefore the country in is actually of her own making. Whether it was when they first came into power in the first budget, spending an extra £70 billion a year through tax rises and increased borrowing, that actually is just putting us in a worse economic position. She's made the problem.
You're the Work and Pensions, or Shadow Work and Pensions Secretary. Do you wonder why the measures brought in by Angela Rayner on employment reforms coming forward next month, why weren't they scored by the experts who forecast what the impact will be of the Spring Statement?
Well, I can't say why the OBR does exactly what it does, but what I do know from talking to businesses is you've got the combination of the jobs tax, the national insurance rises, which we know is reducing employment, which is increasing redundancies, and also then the red tape on employment being brought in by Angela Rayner. That double whammy is such a bad thing for businesses and therefore such a bad thing for employment and people's incomes.
Helen Whately, thank you for joining us. Helen Whately there, with concerns about these cuts here. They wouldn't be what the Tories would do had they won power.
Chris Hope, very, very impressive. When we had a quick pint after the show last night, we said, didn't we, let's tot up all of the cost price rises coming in awful April. You did your homework. You've wiped out that 500 quid. Excellent work, Chris Hope. The best in the business. We'll come back to you shortly later in the show. Thank you very much. Now let's get back to some reaction in the studio with my panel. For the next 3 hours, I'm delighted to probe the expertise of GBNews' senior commentator Nigel Nelson and the free market economist and the fellow at the Centre for Brexit Policy, Catherine McBride. Welcome to you both. I'm going to start with you, Nigel, because you were there today at PMQs.
Indeed. And
at the Spring Statement. In fact, you've got a couple of visual props to hold up there. Just to prove.
These are the two documents which she was working from. That's the OBR report, 174 pages of it. Haven't quite read every word yet. Yeah. And this was the statement that she read out.
Right, so that's the Spring Statement. That's the OBR report. Lots and lots to dive into. The headline figure that leaps out to everybody is something of a surprise, certainly to a lot of GB News viewers, and that is you will be £500 a year better off. As Chris Hope said there, that will be wiped out by energy bills, by TV licences, by council tax, by water, by rates, you name it. But where does that figure come from? How do they get this mythical 500
How they
quid?
got it? What the figure comes from is obviously things like wage rises, lowering inflation, and you're talking about the figure as it stands now. So this comes from the real household disposable income statistics.
Yes.
That's in the OBR, tucked away in there. So that's where that 500 figure comes from. Chris may well be right, of course, that with bills rising, that could be wiped out as we sort of go into next month.
Catherine McBride, it would seem to me that some people will certainly be better off, perhaps if you're a public sector worker, perhaps if you're a train driver, perhaps if you're a junior doctor. There's a great British giveaway from the Labour Party, 47 billion quid to public sector pay. We saw 2.5 billion to junior doctor pay rises, 675 million to train drivers. And by the way, all of the great British giveaways the Labour Party have done thus far, if you include carbon capture, Chagos Islands, Ukraine, etc., 130 billion. By the way, that's 6 times the actual black hole. Beg your pardon, we have to go back to Chris Hope. He's got a next guest for us.
Martin, joining me now is Andrew Griffiths. He's a Shadow Business Secretary. Andrew Griffiths, your reaction there to the Spring Statement?
Well, the big thing is what's not in the Spring Statement, if we're honest. First of all, there is not much headroom. So the Chancellor, having burned through all of her headroom, yes, we're in an uncertain world, but what do you do in an uncertain world? You try and make sure you've got a little bit of headroom.
When you say headroom, what does that mean for viewers?
What it means is the amount in her forecast before she misses her rules, right? Essentially before she has to come back and do another one of these all over again. Didn't have much headroom to start off with, burnt through all of that. It was 10, then she spent an over 15 billion, and now she's had to put that back. But the important thing is there's very little headroom, even after today's, what she would say are difficult decisions. The second thing is the cost of the Employment Rights Bill, this piece of trade union job-killing legislation. It's going to be really damaging for the economy, and the OBR haven't reflected any of that, which means there's only downside. There's every certainty that back here in the autumn we'll be standing here once again and they'll be talking about tax increases.
But they're forecasting better growth over the next 4 years. Yes, not this year, but looking forward, if this big spending boom comes from defence spending, 0.4% of GDP going up because of house building, but perhaps, given the benefit of the doubt, it might work.
Well, Chris, as a patriot, I want my country to succeed and to grow. And if that's what happens, fantastic, so be it. But what we have seen today, don't step away from the fact, today we've seen a halving of growth forecasts. We're seeing the OBR saying even then, it's only a 50-50 whether they hit even that level. And there are big looming clouds like the Employment Rights Bill, the impact on jobs across the economy that haven't even been reflected in today's forecast. So it is a very worrying day for people who care about the UK economy.
And the scale of the benefit cuts, 3 million being affected by the 4.8 billion cut in that budget. Is that going far enough for you?
Well, if you take the Prime Minister at his word, he thinks it's a sort of now a moral crusade to reform welfare. As it happens, we have been trying to reform welfare. We put forward plans at the election that would have gone further, to be clear, but they wouldn't have been rushed and they wouldn't have been done on the back foot suddenly when the Chancellor decides she's got a hole in her forecasts.
But Rachel Reeves, do you think has she got it in her to make these changes, or is she being called out, frankly, by some of the changes in the budget last year?
Well, I think today is all about the OBR, the independent OBR, holding up a mirror and saying this is the state of the economy, this is what your choices, Chancellor, have done to the economy, clearly halving the rate of growth, calling out the fact she's missed even her own fiddled fiscal forecasts is not a very flattering position for the Chancellor to be in.
Andrew Griffiths, thank you. Andrew Griffiths there with a quite dim assessment of the Chancellor's spring statement today. Martin.
We're in Purdah now, aren't we?
Great stuff, Chris. Well, you certainly deserve a £500 pay rise today. You're the busiest man in Britain. Thank you very, very much. Now, moments ago, Nigel Farage asked the Chancellor if he should be telling his constituents in Clacton that they are getting poorer.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Would the Chancellor agree that measuring growth and relative wealth by GDP is not the most relevant number to our constituents? Because we're living in an age of mass immigration and a rising population, it is GDP per capita, surely, that matters to our constituents, and that has fallen consistently for the last 2 years and is falling still. And shouldn't we tell people, actually, they are getting poorer?
Well, the OBR forecast that GDP per capita will increase by 5.6% during the course of this Parliament, having fallen under the previous government. So if he ever gets to Clacton, he can tell his constituents that.
And the usual dig about Clacton. Now, moments ago, the leader of the Liberal Democrats, Ed Davey, gave his reaction to that spring statement.
Well, first of all, we've put forward some fair tax proposals. We've argued that tax on the banks should go back to what it was in 2016, before the Conservatives gave the banks huge tax cuts. We've said that the taxes on social media giants, like the digital services tax, should be increased. So we think fairer taxes on those who can afford it is one way. We do also think we need to get people back into work, but we need to do that by supporting people, not punishing them. So we're really worried that some of the welfare proposals are going to hit the poorest in our country, people who will really struggle to work. We're seeing figures come out of the OBR suggesting 800,000 people are going to lose their PIP by the end of this period. Another 150,000 people lose their carers allowances. A double whammy for some households. That's actually not going to help the economy.
Let's get some immediate reaction now from my panel. That is Nigel Nelson and also Catherine McBride. Catherine, let's bring you in. All these pay rises they're bandying about, great news, but somebody has to pay them. And a lot of small businesses will be bracing themselves for trouble when they have got to get their next pay packet together.
Yes, and next week, or from April, they're all going to have to increase the minimum wage. They're increasing the employers' national insurance contributions. We're going to get increases in rates, business rates. So a whole lot of costs for businesses are going up, and so a lot of businesses are not employing more people because also the start of this workers' rights charter, which means from day one you won't be able to fire someone. They'll be entitled to holidays they'll be entitled to a whole lot of things that they used to have to work for a period of time, usually 2 years before they were eligible. But now they get them from day one. So it's really going to discourage people from employing people, so that only the employed people will get their £500 better off. The people who will never be employed are going to be another burden for the government. I mean, they said there were 3 million people on benefits. Well, unfortunately, I don't see that going down when you're making employment so much more expensive.
OK, Nigel, let's bring you back in. Mel Stride countered Rachel Reeves earlier. I don't know if you stuck around for that bit, but he was saying none of this is her fault. It's Vladimir Putin, it's Ukraine, it's Donald Trump, it's tariffs, even the Conservatives. He said it's anybody's fault but her own. She can give us £500 figures out of this report here, but people aren't feeling better off. In fact, a report yesterday by the Joseph Rowntree Foundation said people are expecting to feel £1,400 worse off.
Yeah, I mean, it depends obviously which figures you take, basically. But you're absolutely right. I mean, she was talking about the theme that ran through the entire statement was we're living in a changing world. And, of course, we are. That we have got Vladimir Putin, we have got Donald Trump.
But the world will always change. But she's got to take responsibility for the situation herself.
I think that we're living in a more changeable world than we normally are. A war going on in Europe. We don't often have that. Let's hope it comes to an end. We've got tariffs on the way from Donald Trump.
There's no tariffs on Britain.
There aren't yet, but at the moment, though, it looks like we're going to get hit we're hit with aluminium and with steel.
We barely make any aluminium or steel anymore.
No, we do.
No, we do.
We export.
America is our third biggest market.
The tariffs won't impact us in any way. What I'm saying is you can't keep blaming tariffs, Trump, Putin, other factors. Own the situation yourself.
But all these things are destabilising the world economy. So that's the problem. She's working against a backdrop of a really dodgy world economy, thanks to those various other factors.
Well, can I just step in, or are we going to a break?
No, go
on. We've had the Ukraine war for 3 years now, so that didn't change at all. OK, that's been around. With the tariffs, our tariffs are higher than the US tariffs. So if you really don't like the US tariffs, you should cut your own. But, of course, even though we have our own Trade Department and we don't have to do what Brussels tells us, no one in Westminster has gone, oh, yeah. We could lower our tariffs to US
Precisely.
level.
And if they did that and took back control, as we were promised with Brexit, we might be getting somewhere. We've got to stop now. We're crossing live to East Sussex now to hear how small businesses are coping with the bombshells after the break. But first, we're going to a break. We're back with you soon.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more.
Whether it's breaking royal news,
please bring us up to date.
Or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons.
Very, very curious.
We bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there short and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The royal family is an enduring symbol of tradition, unity and pride for Britain. At GB News, we celebrate what makes this country great. In our new royal newsletter series, you can join me, Cameron Walker, for Inside the Palace, an exclusive look every week that takes you beyond the gates and brings you the very latest from those at the heart of the monarchy. Never miss a royal moment again. Sign up now. Go to gbnews.com/royal newsletter and get the latest straight to your inbox.
Hi, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and my show is your opportunity to cut through all the noise and dive in headfirst to some robust debates. Ideas clash.
Situation,
No,
Because the failure is...
You're deliberately avoiding my point. Nothing's held back.
And if you think this is the end of it, wait for more.
And we do not shy away from the difficult stuff. Sometimes I want to shake people and say, if only you understood. So join me on Dubes & Co. weeknights at 6 p.m, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 3:28 with me, Martin Daubney, on Spring Statement Day here on GB News. Now, for reaction as to how small businesses are coping with that Spring Statement, let's cross now to GB News reporter Adam Cherry, who is at a boozer in East Sussex. Adam Cherry, what are you hearing from locals there about the Spring Statement? What's it going to mean for the pounds and the pence in their pockets?
It's interesting, Martin. I've been chatting to local business owners all day today. The landlord of this pub, a local construction company owner, both of whom saying as a result of the measures in the autumn budget, which are coming into effect next week, and as a result of rising costs and energy costs and so on, they're making redundancies. So both of my guests today have said that they're making cutbacks to hiring as a result of the economic pressures. In fact, I'm joined now by an investor in the New Inn here in just outside Hastings, Mike Edwards. Mike, you invested in this business about 10 years ago. You survived the pandemic. But how are you feeling about the future?
Not great is the honest answer. Yeah. We just foresee such huge costs coming against any possibility of profits in the business. So you've already heard that Patrick has reduced staff from 26 down to 16. Those are largely young people who would be doing the sort of Saturday type jobs we used to as kids, filling shelves on Tesco's and Sainsbury's, working in a pub in hospitality. Those jobs are just going to disappear. And I spent all last week listening to the government talking about trying to get young people back into employment. And yet to have legislated for the complete opposite.
So it's a combination of the national insurance rise on employers and the national minimum wage, living wage hikes, which is making it more difficult for those at the start of their careers. Is that what you're saying?
That's correct. But I think what most people have missed out on or not understood is that the starting point for when a business has to pay national insurance has been reduced from 9,000 down to 5,000. That means that it's no longer cost efficient, shall we say, to employ young people anymore. And that's their education. Their education is not the 3 R's, or not just the 3 R's, it's also learning how to work.
Yeah. And as I say, I've been chatting to some of your colleagues, some of the other people living locally here. Is there a feeling here in East Sussex that things are getting a lot tougher and there's no real hope for the future, at least not in the short term? I mean, we heard during the Spring Statement today that there's going to be £500 more in your pocket from the Chancellor saying that today. Do you believe the Chancellor? Is that right?
I don't believe the Chancellor, quite honestly. She makes statements, she repeats statements time and time again. 22 billion, black hole. It makes you doubt that such a thing ever existed, quite frankly. She talks about so many different things, and yet she won't do the practical things in life, because I don't think she's ever run a business.
So very quickly, just at the end here, what are those practical things? What would you like to see the government do?
I think I would like to see them make tax cuts, because that will encourage business, particularly employment costs. That will encourage business to hire staff. Once you start hiring staff, you start having wages to spend money to spend into the economy.
Mike Edwards, thank you very much for joining us live on GBNews. Really appreciate it. Back to you, Martin. As I say, it's been a pretty a grisly experience speaking to people here. Lovely to chat to them, but also everyone's saying it's so tough here, and they're having to they're either freezing hiring or they're actually making redundancies, and you can really feel it in the community here. Things are feeling a little bit tough.
Adam Cherry. Adam, can you tell Mike we need people like him running the country? Absolutely bang on the money. Thank you very much for joining us there today from East Sussex, Adam Cherry and Mike Edwards. Now, there's loads more stuff to come between now and 4 o'clock, including we'll be crossing back to Westminster for more live political reaction as we put the difficult questions to the Exchequer of the Secretary. We'll be going to Rachel Reeves for a live press conference in the show as well. But first is your latest news headlines with Katie Bowen.
Martin, thank you. Your top stories this hour. The Chancellor says the Office for Budget Responsibility has halved the UK growth forecast for this year from 2% to 1%. But she also announced that OBR have upgraded their growth forecast from next year to 2029. In her spring statement, she announced final adjustments to the benefits changes unveiled last week. She says the cuts will save £4.8 billion in the welfare budget. The Chancellor told the Commons that the global economy has become more uncertain, adding that the UK has to move quickly in a changing world, as she confirmed a £2.2 billion increase in defence spending to 2.5% of GDP. Rachel Reeves went on to say that house building will hit a 40-year high thanks to Labour's planning reforms. On those changes to the welfare budget, she also told the Commons that the Universal Credit Standard Allowance will increase from £92 per week this year to £106 per week by 2029-30. And in analysis just published by the Department for Work and Pensions, more than 3 million families will be hit by welfare cuts by 2030. Here's what the Chancellor had to say at the dispatch box.
The Labour Party is the party of work. We believe that if you can work, you should work. But if you can't work, you should be properly supported. This government inherited a broken system. More than 1,000 people every day are qualifying for personal independence payments. 1 in 8 young people are not in employment, education or training. If we do nothing, we are writing off an entire generation. That cannot be right, and we will not stand for it. It is a waste of their potential, and it is a waste of their futures, and we will change it.
Well, the leader of the Conservative Party, Kemi Badenoch, labelled the fallout to the Chancellor's statement as chaos.
I think that it was all smoke and mirrors. I remember the last budget when Rachel Reeves said she was smashing glass ceilings. Now it feels like the roof is falling over all our heads. Inflation is up 2.6% to 3.2%. Unemployment is going up, and it's forecast to go higher year after year after year. There's people's jobs out there. That's terrible. And growth has halved. Even the forecasts which he said were promising are lower than what they were last year. Something has to change. This is chaos.
And a record 30,000 migrants have arrived by small boat in Dover since Labour came to power. It follows the arrival of a further 66 migrants this morning who made the illegal journey from France. It's the 8th straight day of migrant activity in the Channel, which has seen more than 1,700 cross since last Thursday. GBNews analysis of the figures reveals that over 30,000 migrants have arrived by small boats in the UK waters since the general election last July. Those are the latest GB News headlines for now. More from me in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Done. My Claim Group sponsors the GB News Finance Report.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2899 and €1.1957 euros. The price of gold is £2,340 and 22 pence per ounce, and the FTSE 100 at 8,711 points.
Done. My Claim Group sponsors the GB News Finance Report. Crash Law 24 sponsors GB News Traffic and Travel Report.
The latest GB News Travel.
Good afternoon, I'm Alan Wright. In Manchester, the M62 westbound is partly blocked after a breakdown between junction 12 for the M60 and junction 11 for Birchwood. In West Sussex, the M23 northbound is queuing after a breakdown. That's between junction 9 for Gatwick Airport and junction 8 for the M25 turn-off. And in Hampshire, there are roadworks on the M3 both ways between the M25 at junction 2 and junction 4A for Farnborough and the A327.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Crash Law 24 sponsors GB News Traffic and Travel Report.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
It's all kicking off in the world of bowling because an historic bowls club could be forced to close after a staggering 2,000% parking fee hike. Members, many of them of course elderly, say they can't afford the jump from 40 quid to an astonishing £840. Now for some, the club is their social lifeline, but the council insists that the change is necessary to ease financial pressures. Well, of course they would. Well, joining me now to discuss this is the club captain of Eastbourne Parade Bowls Club, Pete Hensman. Pete, welcome to the show. This is an astonishing hike in the car parking costs. It must have simply bowled you all over.
Yeah, to use a phrase, you're quite right. We sort of staggered and worried because of the possibility of closing us.
What's the reaction been within the club to what seems like an eye-watering increase?
Well, as you said, several of our members are saying, we just can't join, we can't afford it. The bus service around here is not particularly good, and they can't carry their bowls or get to the club.
And you've been around since 1897. You've got 70 members, got some wonderful pictures there on screens, look, of people just getting together. Absolutely wonderful thing to do. Healthy physically, healthy mentally, and of course a lot of people lose more friends as they get on. Have the council been remotely forthcoming in seeing the light?
I think they've got a bit of a panic on. We got a message inviting us to join the chairman of the council tomorrow to discuss the matter. I hope we're going to get a compromise.
GB News.
Welcome back. It's 20 to 4 on Spring Statement Day with me, Martin Daubney, here on GB News. Now let's cross back now to Westminster to speak to GB News' political editor Christopher Hope, who's joined by Dame Meg Hillier, of course, the chair of the Treasury Select Committee. Chopper, over to you.
That's right, Martin. Dame Meg Hillier, you're joining me now. Next week you ask questions of the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves. What will you be asking her?
Well, look, she today very much lent into the issues around security and defence, so clearly there's some questions there. Though, of course, we'll get the detail on a lot of that spending in the spending review in June, when we'll have her number 2, the Chief Secretary of the Treasury, in. But we also want to be looking at some of the figures. I haven't gone through them all, that in the OBR forecast, whether they're looking a problem for her, what she's going to do if there's challenges ahead with some of the forecast proposals, and also some of the assumptions in those numbers we want to test with her. So, she's clear that she wants to see economic growth. We know that's difficult to deliver. I think she knows that's difficult to deliver, so we're pushing her on how she's going to achieve that.
Some of that growth is 0.4% of GDP from planning reforms. So the OBR, the experts on the economy, have forecast that. They haven't forecast the impact, have they, of the Employment Rights Bill? Will you be asking about that?
Well, we certainly will be asking about some of those projections, because last time they produced this document, the forecast, they didn't have time to plot in the planning reforms. This time that is an uplift for the Chancellor. What we haven't seen this time is the impact of the social security changes that might help people get into work. That wasn't provided to the OBR in time for them to calculate that. But yes, I mean, will be all of these questions will be coming. Of course, when she's in front of us, it will be just the 2nd of April, so it will be difficult to see those impacts. But I think across the committee corridor, which I also chair, the other committees will be asking these questions about the impact on businesses of all of the measures that the government's been putting forward.
Of course, you're a Labour MP, but you're talking to us as chair of the watchdog, the Treasury committee, which looks at the Treasury. What's your take on this? The benefit cuts, £4.8 billion, 3 million people being worse off. It's not why everyone voted Labour last year, is it?
No, but if you look at what the OBR's forecast includes, what it doesn't include is the potential upside of getting people into work. And of course, no one wants to see people not working who want to work. And obviously, if you can work, you should work. Obviously, there needs to be support for the most disabled and vulnerable people, but the people shouldn't be cast aside. And I met some work coaches in Hackney only last week. One of them had got someone who's 49 and hadn't worked since they were 16 and never worked, and they got 3 children and they got them into work. So there is, with the right intent and the right resources, and she's putting extra money into that, you can help people get into work. We don't yet know from this set of forecasts what the expected uptake of that is. So, but of course, look, nobody wants to see people hurt, but we're a party of work. We want to see people working.
And Dame Hillier, what day next week are you interviewing the Chancellor?
On Wednesday next week, the 2nd of April. She managed to miss the 1st of April, which might is all right.
Tune in then. Rachel Reeves in front of Dame Meg Hillier and her committee next Wednesday, not on April Fool's Day, that's Tuesday. Back to you, Martin.
Thank you very much there, Chris. So with Dame Meg Hillier, the chair of the Treasury Select Committee, get some reaction from my panel. Let's start with you, Nigel Nelson. Once again, a line was repeated there. The Labour Party is the party of work. When that was mentioned by Rachel Reeves in the chamber earlier, there was laughter. Everyone laughed at her.
From the Tories, from the Tory side, that one. I mean, this area is the most tricky that Meg Hillier was talking about there, and that is the impact on benefits. So what you're about to see, I mean, this is really serious if you are somebody who relies on benefits because you're disabled, because as of next year, the health element of universal credit is halved. Now, it's a phenomenal number. From £416 is the kind of figure you can get a month if you're severely disabled. You're looking at £208 after that. So those people are going to be hit really badly. That is what is upsetting a lot of Labour MPs.
Let's bring you in, Catherine McBride. Don't you think it's slightly ironic the Labour Party are getting on their haunches about benefits bills getting cut? They didn't seem to care about the winter fuel allowance getting cut. They didn't seem to care about inheritance tax for farmers getting cut. They don't seem to care that we give £7.5 billion a year away in universal credit to immigrants, £7.5 million a day on asylum hotels. So they get very upset about benefits. Does that give us an insight into the mindset? They call themselves the party of work. Are they the party of people who don't work?
Well, you could say that, but it is a problem because we just saw in a clip that there are more people arriving in rubber dinghies again today, and we're putting them up in hotels, and that is a big part of our spending. And we've got to stop doing that. I mean, it is an incentive. It encourages more and more people to come. And it's like, well, why are we cutting benefits for people who are severely disabled when we are putting... They may as well go to France, get in a dinghy and get put in a hotel and get fed and get all the other benefits.
And funny enough, we do hear that from people. A lot of people in Britain, especially older people who contact us here at GB News, Nigel, they do say they feel that the priorities of this government are about asylum seekers and or about, people on benefits. We've got a huge benefits problem. It's going to be, £100 billion a year by 2040? We've got to do something about that. And the moment it's raised, people like Jeremy Corbyn, Diane Abbott, they all start crying foul. It's like we've got to get to grips with this cost.
No, I agree with you entirely. And I think what we should have done is had a proper review to reform benefits, to reform the benefit system. So the question really is, why are so many people on benefits? Is the country getting sicker? Are people being overdiagnosed instead, which is what Wes Streeting has suggested?
Or are they getting work shy? Were they became addicted to benefits during COVID, during the Great British Giveaway?
That's my point about doing a proper review, to find out the answer to those very questions.
But do the Labour Party have the stomach to do that? The moment they start looking at the benefits bill, the backbenchers start bleating about it.
I was talking about looking at the benefit system and why people are on benefits. At the moment, Rachel Reeves is desperate for money, so you have to see this as essentially...
She's taking it off pensioners. She's taking it off farmers and giving it to immigrants.
Essentially a cost-cutting exercise. And I don't think it's been given to immigrants as such.
Well, it is.
Yes.
There's been 30,000 illegals come under Labour. £124
but you're not
a day.
taking money off
£2.4 million a day.
But you're not taking money off pensioners to give to immigrants. I'm against the.
You're taking it off taxpayers.
I'm against what happened to pensioners. I think that they should have been taxed on their winter allowance instead, so the richer pensioners paid a substantial portion of it back.
OK, we have to move on and get to our next break, because next we'll go to Merseyside to hear your reaction to the spring statements with me, Martin Daubney, here on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello again, I'm here with your latest GB News weather update from the Met Office. As we go through the next 24 hours or so, we are going to see some rain pushing into the northwest, but ahead of this, we still have some further fine, dry and warm weather to come because high pressure firmly in control. But yes, a front feeding into northwestern parts is going to bring increasing amounts of cloud and some rain as we go through into this evening and overnight. That rain spreading its way across many parts of Scotland, even pushing into Northern Ireland as well, and it could be quite heavy at times, quite persistent as well. Further south, mostly dry overnight, perhaps some thick cloud over northern and western parts of England and Wales, bringing a spot of drizzle, but lots of clear skies, especially towards the southeast, where it could turn quite chilly, temperatures dropping into low single figures. So in the south, first thing tomorrow morning, a fairly fine start for most of us. Yes, there will be some cloud around, perhaps even the odd pocket of mist and fog, but generally a lot of dry, bright weather to come. Further north and west, though, it's a cloudier story. Like I said, a few spots of drizzly rain over some parts of northern and western England and Wales. Lots of cloud, though, across parts of Northern Ireland and Scotland, and here some heavy persistent rain as well. Perhaps some brightness across the far north of Scotland, Orkney, Shetland, perhaps seeing some glimmers of sunshine, but also some showery outbreaks of rain. Then as we go through tomorrow, staying pretty cloudy, wet and even blustery at times across parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland. England and Wales, though, faring drier. Some drizzly rain perhaps for northern and western parts, but on the whole, a lot of fine weather to come, similar to today. Temperatures in the southeast peaking in the mid to high teens, 17, perhaps even 18 Celsius. That cloud and rain towards the northwest doesn't make a huge amount of progress southeastwards as we go through the end of the day tomorrow, but it is going to pep up a little bit and eventually push its way into England and Wales as we go through overnight and into Friday. And then while the outlook for the weekend is a bit mixed at times, temperatures are a little bit lower than recently.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, though.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Welcome back, and let's cross straight back now to Westminster to our political editor, Chris Hope, who's snagged another politician for us. Chris, over to you.
That's right, Martin. With me now is James Murray, who's a Treasury Minister in the government. James Murray, thank you for joining us on GB News. We're £500 better off, the OBR say, but I'm going to give you some numbers from next week. These bills going up: energy bills £111, council tax £109, water bills £123, a fiver on car tax, TV licence, broadband £36, bus fares maybe £110 across the year, rail fares at 4.6%. How do you get? I mean, that way outweighs the £500 a year better off we're meant to be.
So the figure of £500, it will be as a result of all we're doing across this Parliament. So that is the amount by which people will be better off per person per year by the end of the Parliament, in comparison to what the previous government had forecast when they were in the last few days of them being in office. So when they had their previous forecast, and you compare what their previous forecast to where we are now, that's where the £500 improvement comes from. And where that comes from is because we have been so focused on growth. And actually, one of the really important things in the OBR's report today was to recognise that the changes we've been making to planning system, something that we've been speaking about since the first few days in office, is now being recognised by the OBR as not only building hundreds of thousands of new homes, but also boosting economic growth in the public finances. And that's why they've had to uprate their growth forecasts for the year 2026 onwards, which is good news for the country.
And what that means is the OBR believe you're going to do it, unlike maybe the previous Tory governments when NIMBY's campaigners got in the way of that. Why didn't the OBR, though, score the Employment Rights Bill, which many are saying is going to be a downward depression on jobs?
So the OBR has its own thresholds for what it scores, and it doesn't score things lightly. It takes a bit of evidence and so on to make sure they are going to score things. What's really good about the planning reforms is that these are reforms we got on with right away after the general election. Obviously, in the budget last year, the OBR didn't score them because they wanted more evidence, but they've now got to the stage in the spring statement today where they're saying, OK, this is the real deal. You really are reforming planning. This really is going to have an impact. And by the way, that's just the first set of planning changes that we're making. So it's the changes to what's called the NPPF, technical document, but it's the big planning document that governs planning in the country. There's more planning changes coming. The new planning bill only had its second reading in Parliament this Monday, so that's still further down the line. And so when you add that on top of what we've already had recognised by the OBR, we're showing we can make a real difference through our planning reform.
But the growth is halved. That's really an indictment on your government's policies.
Well, look, we're not happy with what's happened to the growth forecast this year. We recognise it's due to international factors, largely global insecurity. The OECD has downrated all advanced economies' economic growth prospects for this year. But actually, if you look at what the OECD said about the G7 countries, we were 7th out of 7 back at the time of the election. We are now 2nd out of 7. So it is a difficult, uncertain time for countries around the world. But we are in a position where we've gone from 7th out of 7 to 2nd out of 7. And that reflects the fact that the OECD have looked at what we're doing and given that judgment.
James Murray, thank you. James Murray there with the defence of this spring statement there here in Westminster. Back to you, Martin.
Hey, Chris, back to you, of course, throughout the rest of the show, and we'll be hearing from the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, live shortly as she prepares to defend her spring statement on that stage there from outside Downing Street. GB News will be live there. Stick around with me, Martin Daubney, on GB News Britain's News Channel. Now it's time for your weather.
Expect a warm front, moving from the kitchen right through to the rest of the house. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello again, I'm here with your latest GB News weather update from the Met Office. As we go through the next 24 hours or so, we are going to see some rain pushing into the northwest. But ahead of this, we still have some further fine, dry and warm weather to come because high pressure firmly in control. But yes, a front feeding into northwestern parts is going to bring increasing amounts of cloud and some rain as we go through into this evening and overnight. That rain spreading its way across many parts of Scotland, even pushing into Northern Ireland as well. And it could be quite heavy at times, quite persistent as well. Further south, mostly dry overnight, perhaps some thick cloud over northern and western parts of England and Wales, bringing a spot of drizzle, but lots of clear skies, especially towards the southeast, where it could turn quite chilly, temperatures dropping into low single figures. So in the south, first thing tomorrow morning, a fairly fine start for most of it. Yes, there will be some cloud around, perhaps even the odd pocket of mist and fog, but generally a lot of dry, bright weather to come. Further north and west, though, it's a cloudier story. Like I said, a few spots of drizzly rain over some parts of northern and western England and Wales. Lots of cloud, though, across parts of Northern Ireland and Scotland, and here some heavy, persistent rain as well. Perhaps some brightness across the far north of Scotland, Orkney, Shetland, perhaps seeing some glimmers of sunshine, but also some showery outbreaks of rain. Then as we go through tomorrow, staying pretty cloudy, wet and even blustery at times across parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland. England and Wales, though, faring drier. Some drizzly rain perhaps for northern and western parts, but on the whole, a lot of fine weather to come, similar to today. Temperatures in the southeast peaking in the mid to high teens, 17, perhaps even 18 Celsius. That cloud and rain towards the northwest doesn't make a huge amount of progress southeastwards as we go through the end of the day tomorrow, but it is going to pep up a little bit and eventually push its way into England and Wales as we go through overnight and into Friday. And then while the outlook for the weekend is a bit mixed at times, temperatures are a little bit lower than recent.
A positive outlook through the night will power through to a bright day ahead. Boxed Home Battery Storage, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Crash Law 24. sponsors GB News Traffic and Travel Report.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon, I'm Alan Wright. In Cheshire, the M6 southbound is partly blocked by a broken down vehicle between junction 19 at Knutsford and 18 for Middlewich. In Hertfordshire, the M25 is blocked clockwise after a collision. It's between junction 20 for Kings Langley and 21 for the M1. And in Berkshire, the M4 westbound is partly blocked by a car on fire. It's just by junction 4B. That's the turn-off for the M25 with queues all the way back to Heathrow Airport.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Crash Law 24 sponsors GB News Traffic and Travel Report.
You could have £17,777 in tax-free cash to play with this spring. Cash to spend on anything you like. And if that wasn't enough, we're also going to give you not one, but two sought-after designer watches and the latest Mulberry handbag. How would winning that sound? For another chance to win the lot, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. Call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Or post your name and number to GB12 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 4th of April. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Very, very good afternoon to you. It's 4 p.m. and welcome to the Martin Daubney Show here on GB News. As you can see on your screens, broadcasting live from the heart of Westminster and all across the UK. Today, despite promising to fix the foundations of the economy at today's spring statement, the Chancellor Rachel Reeves announced growth will be halved in 2025. Well, she blamed Vladimir Putin, she blamed Donald Trump, tariffs and even the Conservative Party. And one of her boldest claims was that you will all be £500 better off.
The OBR say today that people will be, on average, over £500 a year better off under this Labour government.
And the Chancellor also announced a whopping £2.2 billion increase in spending on defence.
Mr. Speaker, that is how we make our country a defence industrial superpower. So the skills of the future, the jobs of the future and the opportunities of the future can be found right here in the United Kingdom.
And Tory leader Kemi Badenoch wasted no time hitting back and slammed the spring statement.
I think that it was all smoke and mirrors. I remember the last budget when Rachel Reeves said she was smashing glass ceilings. Now it feels like the roof is falling over all our heads.
And Reform UK MP Richard Tice took us on a political trip earlier when he stated the OBR was on drugs.
I think doesn't add up. I think the people at the OBR, frankly, have been eating or they've been eating magic mushrooms or something, because this is delusional.
Tice and his magic mushrooms always knew he was a fun guy. Now, we've also been speaking to farmers who are furious at the lack of support from the Chancellor.
Agriculture is on its knees. I've spent 50 years farming. This is the worst period of my farming life. Since the November budget, I've got up in the morning and thought, what is the point of farming?
Throughout today's show, we'll bring your expert analysis to answer the only question people care about. Will you be better off today than you were yesterday? Is Britain booming or is Britain going bust? Our reporters have been getting instant reaction from across the country.
Inflation up, borrowing up, growth halved and millions losing a lot of their benefits. Rachel Reeves will defend all that in quarter of an hour and I'll be there. Stay tuned.
Well, absolutely no mention of farming, no mention of agriculture, no mention of rural communities at all. And it's been noticed here in Northumberland on a beautiful farm, Bainbridge Farm.
A predicted saving of around £3.4 billion thanks to cuts to welfare. But how will people in places like Knowsley cope with the slashed disability benefits?
And live pictures on your screen there now. We will be crossing live to the Chancellor very shortly, who'll be holding a press conference and should be grilled by the press, including our man Chris Hope. That's all. Welcome to the show on Spring Statement Day. All of the experts' analysis and reaction throughout the rest of the show. Today, Chancellor Rachel Reeves claimed that every single Brit would be £500 better off. Do you feel £500 better off? Do you feel 5 pence better off? I've been asking people on gbnews.com since the start of the show, do you feel better off? And the resounding answer so far is no. No, I don't. In fact, I feel worse off. Although Debbie here steals the show. She went £500 better off. That's less than the price of Sabrina Carpenter tickets. Get in touch with the show. Do you feel better off or do you feel the pinch? Let us know, gbnews.com/you'll say. I'll be going to the Chancellor for a live press conference soon. But before that, it's your headlines with Katie Bowen.
Martin, thank you and good afternoon. The top stories at 4 minutes past 4. The Chancellor says the Office for Budget Responsibility has halved the UK growth forecast for this year from 2% to 1%. But she also announced the OBR have upgraded their growth forecast from next year to 2029. In her spring statement, she announced final adjustments to benefits changes unveiled last week. She says the cuts will save £4.8 billion in the welfare budget. The Chancellor told the Commons that the global economy has become more uncertain, adding that the UK has to move quickly in a changing world as she confirmed a £2.2 billion increase in defence spending to 2.5% of GDP. Rachel Reeves went on to say that house building will hit a 40-year high thanks to Labour's planning reforms. And on those changes to the welfare budget, she also told the Commons that the Universal Credit Standard Allowance will increase from £92 per week this year to £106 per week by 2029-30. And an analysis just published by the Department for Work and Pensions, more than 3 million families will be hit by welfare cuts by 2030. The Chancellor is due to speak at a press conference imminently, but here's what she had to say at the dispatch box earlier on.
The Labour Party is the party of work. We believe that if you can work, you should work. But if you can't work, you should be properly supported. This government inherited a broken system. More than 1,000 people every day are qualifying for personal independence payments. 1 in 8 young people are not in employment, education or training. If we do nothing, we are writing off an entire generation. That cannot be right, and we will not stand for it. It is a waste of their potential, and it is a waste of their futures, and we will change it.
Well, the leader of the Conservative Party, Kemi Badenoch, labelled the fallout to the Chancellor's statement as chaos.
I think that it was all smoke and mirrors. I remember the last budget when Rachel Reeves said she was smashing glass ceilings. Now it feels like the roof is falling over all our heads. Inflation is up 2.6% to 3.2%. Unemployment is going up and it's forecast to go higher year after year after year. There's people's jobs out there. That's terrible. And growth has halved. Even the forecasts which he said were promising are lower than what they were last year. Something has to change. This is chaos.
Well, new figures released this morning show UK inflation eased by more than expected last month. The price of clothes and shoes fell for the first time in more than 3 years, according to the Office for National Statistics. The rate of consumer price index inflation fell to 2.8% in February from 3% in January. The latest figures mean the cost of living is still rising for households across the UK, and inflation remains above the Bank of England's 2% target, but at a much slower rate than in recent years. A record of 30,000 migrants have arrived by small boats in Dover since Labour came to power. It follows the arrival of a further 66 migrants this morning who made the illegal journey from France. It's the 8th straight day of migrant activity in the Channel, which has seen more than 1,700 cross since last Thursday. GB News analysis of the figures reveals that over 30,000 migrants have arrived by small boat in UK waters since the general election last July. And the University of Sussex has been fined £585,000 by the higher education regulator, the Office for Students, for failing to uphold freedom of speech. It follows the case of Professor Kathleen Stock, who left the university in 2021 after being accused of transphobia for her views on sex and gender issues. The OFS criticised the university's policy statement on trans and non-binary equality, saying its requirement to positively represent trans people and an assertion that transphobic propaganda not be tolerated could lead staff and students to self-censor. The University of Sussex plans to challenge the OFS findings legally. Those are the latest GB News headlines. Now let's go back to Martin.
Thank you, Katie. Got some breaking news for you now. Prince William, the Prince of Wales, is to appear on an episode of Clarkson's Farm and revealed that Prince George even will be among the fans tuning in. Breaking news, bit of feel-good news for you. The Prince of Wales, William, is set to appear on an episode of Clarkson's Farm and revealed that Prince George will be among those fans tuning in. I wonder if they'll mention the inheritance tax rate. Probably not. Now, William was joined by stars of the hit series Caleb Cooper and Charlie Island on a visit to meet young farmers in Somerset earlier on today. And a camera crew from the Amazon Prime show followed William on his trip to Folly Farm, nestled in a 250-acre nature reserve in Pensford, Chew Valley, where it's raising awareness of mental health care for farmers, an excellent cause. William told Cooper as they met outside in the spring sunshine, "You've got George watching now." I said to him, "What shall I say if I meet Caleb?" And he said, "Tell Caleb to mind his language." Excellent stuff. Now, that is a great piece of feel-good news. Prince William to appear in an episode of Clarkson's Farm talking about farmers' mental health. That's beautiful. Now let's move back to the spring statement, because despite promising to fix the foundations of the economy at today's spring statements, Chancellor Rachel Reeves announced growth will be halved this year. What does this all mean for you at home? Well, let's bring in now the personal finance expert, Gemma Godfrey. Gemma, welcome to the show. The Chancellor very confidently telling us we'll all be £500 better off. But if you do the maths, and I'm getting hundreds of messages here from GB News viewers, well, saying, hang on, my energy bill is going to be £100 next month, my council tax is going to be £109 next month, my water bill an extra £100, TV licence, bus fares, you name it. It seems all of this fabled £500 increase is being wiped out in the real world.
I think it's a real shame because, first of all, I think our most vulnerable are the ones that are getting most punished. As you've heard, you've got a lot of cuts that are coming to welfare. And it's at the same time that from the 1st of April, we're going to be seeing significant price increases. So there's increases due on energy bills, on water bills, on council tax bills as well. So we're not going to be feeling the benefit in our pockets. We're going to be continuing to feel the pain. And actually what we heard today was inflation, which is prices are rising, they are actually not going to fall. That price increase rate is not going to fall to 2% until 2027. So we're not going to be able to get some form of price stability, for quite a while as well. So we are going to be feeling it every time we go shopping. And actually, again, if we look at some analysis, we try and look under the hood of what was announced, some of the calculations actually assume that things like there'll be a 5p fuel duty increase. There are all these little things that are kind of coming out the woodwork, which means means that hardworking families are going to be feeling the strain. And then I'm happy to talk about how our most vulnerable are also going to be, for want of a better word, punished for and some of that support taken away from them.
Okay, we're expecting Rachel Reeves to appear in the next few minutes at a press conference. We'll cross live to that when it happens. But picking up on that point there, the Press Association are reporting that nearly 300,000 people will be forced into relative poverty by benefits cuts, including 50,000 children. This is the kind of budget we might have expected from a Conservative government. It sounds like an austerity budget, almost, dare I say it, a bit nasty.
I mean, the challenge is, where do you find the money? If you're going to be spending more on defence, where are you going to be able to find it? So whenever you see a budget, it's about what hand taking what and what hand is giving. Where are they going to be able to find those areas? So I think the thing that's really concerning is about 800,000 people are going to be losing their personal independence payments. And about an estimated 150,000 people may be losing their carers allowance. And what's really hard is that some families may be reliant on both, the carer and also people that aren't able to go to work, aren't able to look after themselves either. So our most vulnerable families, are the ones that are going to be suffering the most at a time when, as we said just before, the price of living does continue to rise. So this is a really, really tough time for families. And I think it's interesting because we talked a lot about the cost of living crisis a few years ago, but actually prices haven't come down. They're still going up, maybe not at the same rate, but families are really struggling to make ends meet. And it's about feeding their families, the energy to keep them warm. And we've come out of winter, but again, that's a huge cost there. And it's a really tough time to be able to do what's needed, and credit card bills are going up as well. So people are really trying to find out where can they get some financial support. And unfortunately, the government is withdrawing it.
OK, thank you very much for your expertise. That's the financial expert, Gemma Godfrey. Thank you. Let's cross now to Westminster to speak to the Shadow Treasury Minister, Gareth Davies, MP. Gareth, welcome to the show. £500 better off, we're being told we're going to feel. I'm not getting that message from any of our viewers. In fact, they're all feeling worse off. Do the Chancellor's numbers add up to you?
That is putting a rosy tint on a pretty gloomy day, I have to tell you, because it's quite remarkable for a government who made growth their #1 mission to have the OBR cut their growth forecast in half this year. But to be honest, this is nothing new to your viewers. GB News has covered this very extensively. Businesses have consistently said since the autumn budget that the rise in national insurance contributions will harm their ability to hire people, it'll harm their ability to grow their own businesses, and in turn, that will have a massive impact on our wider economy, and we're seeing that from the OBR today. In addition, that new tax rise will be pushed on to prices, and that's why the OBR have also said that inflation, unbelievably, will be going up beyond 3% in the coming months, and that is going to hurt families, it's going to hurt individuals and businesses across the country.
Gareth, were you struck by the fact that none of the halving of the growth rate seemed to be anything to do with Rachel Reeves or the Labour Party? Not my fault, anybody's fault but mine. In fact, it's the fault of Putin, of Donald Trump, of tariffs, even the Conservative Party.
Yeah, well, it's everybody else's fault. But let's be really clear about one thing. This is her mopping up the mess from the autumn budget. It is obviously something that you have to consider in the Treasury. I was Exchequer Secretary before the election. I worked on budgets. I know how hard it is to make these decisions when you have externalities and global factors that do impact your domestic economy. But what you don't do is overextend your economy. You don't increase spending by £70 billion. You don't impose a £25 billion tax on businesses that will harm growth. You don't overexpose our country to those global shocks. And that's exactly what she did. That's why we've been calling today an emergency budget. She said originally she was just going to read out the spring statement of what the OBR's assessment of the economy is, but she's announced new policies today because she had to make up £14 billion of lost money because of her autumn budget. It is absolute disgrace, and I think people, your viewers, are rightly outraged by this.
OK, we're just waiting for the Chancellor to pop up there at Downing Street. We'll cross to that when we can. But before I let you go, Gareth Davies, how would anything be different under the Conservative Party? People were feeling the pinch when you were in power. Why should we believe that you would make things any better if you were to be in power?
It's a fair challenge. We went through a really traumatic time in the last few years, obviously with the pandemic, and then the war in Ukraine pushed up energy prices, which pushed up inflation. But we had just started to get that under control.
You're blaming the same as the Chancellor. You're blaming everything but yourself. It was Ukraine. It was energy prices. When will governments take responsibility?
Because it was a genuine issue that we had a global pandemic and a war in Ukraine that broke out in 2022. We are not in a crisis now where we have a global pandemic. We have calm times. We delivered the fastest growth in the G7. It has now plummeted. We delivered 2% inflation, which is the target. It is now going to go above 3%. And unbelievably, they criticised us for racking up debt, which we admit we did because we supported people through the pandemic, but it is going up even higher under this Chancellor. In fact, debt interest payments are going to be £30 billion more as a result of this Chancellor's actions. That is half the education budget just paid in interest. So yes, we went through a traumatic time. We had to deal with global crises, but we had got the economy back on track after those massive events, and I'm afraid we're now going in the opposite direction.
OK, thank you very much for joining us on today's show. And that's the Shadow Treasury Minister, Gareth Davis, MP. Thank you for your time. Now, let's get some reaction to my panel now. I'm still with the senior commentator, political commentator, Nigel Nelson, and the free market economist and fellow at the Centre for Brexit Policy, Catherine McBride. Catherine, I'm going to come to you first, because you've been beavering away, going through this OBR report, this weighty tome in front of you, looking for the fabled sources of growth. And a huge point of today's spring statement was all of this will be precipitated, built upon the fact we're going to be building 1.5 million new homes. No, hey presto, cheaper rents, lots of jobs. But do the numbers add up to you?
Well, I'm going to disappoint you with the cheaper rent. Not only are they predicting we're going to plummet in house building next year, and then miraculously, private house building is going to go from 100,000 a year to 200,000 a year in the next 3 years. I mean, it is, as you said, Elon Musk takeoff sort of graph. But also, they're predicting that the cost of the property transactions are going to be higher, so that the cost of housing is going to go from from 290,000 to 370,000. And they're also predicting that mortgage rates will go from 3.7% to 4.7% on average. So you're suddenly going to have more houses that are more expensive and cost more to get a mortgage. And I don't quite see how all of that's going to come together.
Nigel Nelson, it's a fair point, because the whole point about building 1.5 million new homes, and they keep saying the party over there wants to block it, we're the party of the builders, they're the party of the blockers. More homes is meant to equal cheaper rent, more availability. These numbers aren't even saying that. No, so it's got to go up.
I mean, I'm surprised too about the figures about the cost of actually buying a home will go up, because obviously more homes mean that there's greater supply. The whole point about this is the reason you can deliver it is because of reforms to planning. So it is building on greyfield sites, the things that used to be so-called green belt, but turned out to be a car park or waste ground or something like that. It's utilising that. It is stopping planning applications being objected to in the way they are now.
But Nigel, we found out earlier this week by scrapping a contract with one of the biggest asylum seeker hotel chains, the government themselves admitted that some of this new housing will go to asylum seekers. Well, I mean, new bills for new arrivals.
The whole point about asylum seekers, it happens now. That if it is possible to put an asylum seeker in some spare accommodation that a local authority has got.
Which spare accommodation?
Well, they have, for instance, in my local authority, there was a 6-bedroomed house that they could not do anything with. They didn't have any families of that size. What they then did was...
There are no British families that would like a 6-bedroom house.
They may well be in Britain, but they weren't in my area, which was what we were talking talking about, and it went to a Syrian family which
there were no British homeless people, no veterans. They had to go to a family of Syrians. I mean, I
come from Kent. This was Kent, and there were none. That house had been empty for a considerable period of time because they did not have a big enough family to fill it. Syrian refugees were then put there. They're in a
family of 6 or 6 lads.
Oh no, this was actually a family with 6 children. So six grown-up children.
Isn't that lovely to hear? Isn't that lovely to hear? A 6-bedroom house in your
Martin,
manor.
It is lovely to hear.
No, it's not.
Here was a family absolutely desperate, fleeing civil war. They've now assimilated with the local population. They've taken part in village life. I think that's a success story.
Do you? Okay.
And that was a house that was not being used. That's the point. Eventually, what would have happened to that house is it would have been sold by either the local authority or the housing association.
So why couldn't your local authority identify that same house and chop it into units for people who can't afford to get the property ladder locally? Why couldn't it have been given to homeless people locally? There are London boroughs shipping out their problem families to places like Rushmore. Talk to locals all the time. And you're saying this is a success story. I would say it's a failure of providing housing for Brits. And the numbers are clear on this. We're spending £3 billion a year on housing asylum seekers, housing them, £7 billion on universal credit for immigrants. I know I keep mentioning this, but the fact of the matter is people are being told they're better off, they don't feel it, and then when they see where their money is going, they're feeling incredibly frustrated. The Labour Party don't seem to want to grasp the nettle on this.
But what you're talking about here is 1.5 million homes, the biggest house building programme since World War II, and the way to do it is to get rid of planning rules. What that means is affordable housing. There's an insistence there that the housing will be affordable to home more people. This has nothing to do with the asylum seekers.
That word affordable does not appear in this at all. Sorry. There is nothing in here that says they're building affordable houses. In fact, most of the increase is private house building.
It is private house building, and there is a quota then of affordable housing amongst that for those privatised, those private companies.
But just say they build 1 million houses a year, which they won't.
Well, it won't be 1 million a year.
Just say they did. Just say they did. Right, yeah. Net migration last year was 1 million. Illegal immigration under the Labour Party has been 30,000. We're told the hotels are full. Where are they going to go? They're going to go in those houses.
Well, no. I mean, the whole point is that you obviously got to accommodate these people somewhere.
Why?
Well, where are you going to put them? If people actually land here, they become our responsibility, and no one has come up with a way of actually getting them to go somewhere else. Now, it may well be.
If only. I mean, wouldn't that be a dream?
Well, it would. I agree with you. I'm not in favour of.
In France, they don't house them. They're living in tents in Calais. They're not being housed in France.
The lawyers wouldn't allow that in the Labour Party. They wouldn't allow asylum seekers to be in tents. They would be giving them these houses. They'd be given the 6-bedroom manor in your place.
They need to be accommodated, quite right. And if you're going to accommodate them with local authority housing, that costs £14 a night versus £140 in a hotel.
OK, that housing could be given to local people. We have to move on because next, the defence budget will get a £2.2 billion boost for next year. But will it make any difference whatsoever? We'll have all of the analysis next with me, Martin Daubney, on GBNews, and my wonderful panel, Britain's News Channel.
Headliners on GB News 11 p.m. every night. It's got 3 top comedians going through the next day's newspapers so you don't have to read them, which is great.
That's a good point. He's lying. Maybe he's not lying.
That's Headliners every night from 11 p.m. and 5 a.m. as well on GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there short and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The royal family is an enduring symbol of tradition, unity and pride for Britain. At GB News, we celebrate what makes this country great. In our new royal newsletter series, you can join me, Cameron Walker, for Inside the Palace, an exclusive look every week that takes you beyond the gates and brings you the very latest from those at the heart of the monarchy. Never miss a royal moment again. Sign up now. Go to gbnews.com/royal newsletter and get the latest straight to your inbox.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more.
Whether it's breaking royal news, please bring us up to date, or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons.
Very, very curious.
We bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Hi, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and my show is your opportunity to cut through all the noise and dive in headfirst to some robust debates. Ideas clash.
Situation,
Because the failure is... You're deliberately avoiding my point. Nothing's held back.
And if you think this is the end of it, wait for more.
And we do not shy away from the difficult stuff. Sometimes I want to shake people and say, if only you understood. So join me on Jubes & Co. weeknights at 6 p.m, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back, 4:28 with me, Martin Daubney, on GB News. Now, we're going to be crossing to Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, in a short while time. But before that, the defence budget will get the expected £2.2 billion boost for next year. But will it make any difference? Well, joining us now is GB News' Home and Security Editor, Mark White. So, Mark, no amazing surprises. We knew there was going to be a £2 billion hike, but would it be just a drop in the ocean?
Well, it will absolutely be that, because you have had decades in which the defence budget has been just hollowed out in the UK, and as a result, the defences of the UK are in a woeful state in places with a shortage of key assets like ships and submarines, tanks even, and of course the army falling to its lowest level since Napoleonic times. It will make a difference if the trajectory continues to be upwards, and clearly that's the indication we're getting from the Labour government at the moment. What we got from Rachel Reeves in her spring budget or her spring statement today was that accentuation of the positive, trying to put out the message that, of course, it's not just about national security, protecting ourselves in an uncertain world, which is absolutely a laudable aim, but it can also have very significant benefits for the economy. And she spoke in particular about Barrow and Furness, where I was last week with the Prime Minister as he laid the keel for the new class of ballistic missile submarines, the Dreadnought class, and he laid the keel on HMS Dreadnought. Now, this is a town, Barrow, that is a defence industry town, really. It's a one industry town, more or less. 15,000 of the 60,000 plus population there work at BAE Systems, the shipbuilding, submarine building plant in Barrow, and that number is expanding all the time. They took on 900 apprentices in the last year. That's the kind of approach that the government sees. Rachel Reeves was talking about a defence industrial superpower is what they want the UK to become in the years ahead. And she spoke about Glasgow and Newport and Derby and other towns across the country that could benefit from this, and also Portsmouth, where she said the main naval base, the country's main naval base in Portsmouth, will be regenerated as part of the plans to look at, in particular, new technologies. Now, one of the new technologies they're looking at is this new Dragonfire laser system to fit onto Royal Navy ships. Previously, we were talking about one Royal Navy ship by 2027 that would be fitted with this laser kit to test it out. Now this new money will allow for 4 vessels to be fitted out with Dragon. They have moved the sort of testing program forward as well. And they're also looking at other things, Martin, such as the use of drones and artificial intelligence. They want to ring fence 10% of the equipment budget for novel technologies, so new technologies going forward. But one of the key areas they might still have difficulty with is Ministry of Defence procurement. We know that has been a basket case over the years, such as the Ajax armoured fighting vehicle. More than £6 billion that programme has cost. It's been beset by delays and problems, still not due to come into full operation until 2029. So getting the procurement right is much easier said than done.
And of course, Mark White, Captain Starmer's targets could be torpedoed. Of course, if Donald Trump suddenly says, actually, it needs to be 5% of your GDP. Thank you very, very much, Mark White, for joining us on the show. Now let's crack straight on into your news headlines. And here's Katie Bowen.
Martin, thank you. Your top stories this hour. The Chancellor says the Office for Budget Responsibility has halved the UK growth forecast for this year from 2% to 1%. But she also announced that OBR have upgraded their growth forecast from next year to 2029. In her spring statement, she announced final adjustments to benefits changes unveiled last week. She says the cuts will save £4.8 billion in the welfare budget. The Chancellor told the Commons that the global economy has become more uncertain, adding that the UK has to move quickly in a changing world, as she confirmed a £2.2 billion increase in defence spending to 2.5% of GDP. Rachel Reeves went on to say that house building will hit a 40-year high thanks to Labour's planning reforms. On those changes to the welfare budget, she also told the Commons that the Universal Credit Standard Allowance will increase from £92 per week this year to £106 per week by 2029-30. And an analysis published by the Department for Work and Pensions, more than 3 million families will be hit by welfare cuts by 2030. The Chancellor is due to speak at a press conference imminently, but here's what she had to say earlier at the dispatch box.
The Labour Party is the party of work. We believe that if you can work, you should work. But if you can't work, you should be properly supported. This government inherited a broken system. More than 1,000 people every day are qualifying for personal independence payments. 1 in 8 young people are not in employment, education or training. If we do nothing, we are writing off an entire generation. That cannot be right, and we will not stand for it. It is a waste of their potential, and it is a waste of their futures, and we will change it.
Well, the leader of the Conservative Party, Kemi Badenoch, labelled the fallout to the Chancellor's statement as chaos.
I think that it was all smoke and mirrors. I remember the last budget when Rachel Reeves said she was smashing glass ceilings. Now it feels like the roof is falling over all our heads. Inflation is up 2.6% to 3.2%. Unemployment is going up, and it's forecast to go higher year after year after year. There's people's jobs out there. That's terrible. And growth has halved. Even the forecasts which he said were promising are lower than what they were last year. Something has to change. This is chaos.
And the Prince of Wales is to appear on an episode of Clarkson's Farm, and revealed that Prince George will be among the fans tuning in. William was joined by stars of the hit series, Caleb Cooper and Charlie Island, on a visit to meet young farmers in Somerset earlier today. The Prince of Wales visited Folly Farm in the Chew Valley to raise awareness of mental health care for farmers. He also met with the next generation of the Duchy of Cornwall tenant farmers. Those are the latest GB News headlines. More from me in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Crash Law 24 sponsors GB News Traffic and Travel Report.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon, I'm Alan Wright. In Cheshire, the M6 southbound is partly blocked by a breakdown. It's between junction 19 for Knutsford and 18 for Middlewich. In Buckinghamshire, the M1 southbound is partly blocked after a collision between junction 14 for Milton Keynes and 13 for Bedford and the A421. And in Hertfordshire, long queues on the clockwise M25, which is partly blocked after a collision between Kings Langley at junction 20 and junction 21 for the M1.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Crash Law 24 sponsors GB News Traffic and Travel Report.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
I do think that there is extremities in how this has been approached with, you can't eat kebabs anymore. The Climate Change Committee isn't talking about banning meat. It's talking about reducing meat, perhaps having some incentives for plant-based diets. It's talking about doing small changes, not phasing out everything, doing small changes to move to a net zero future, a more sustainable future.
How can me not having a large dollar combat, I don't know, China opening one coal-fired power station a week? Come on, this is pointless.
Well, there is other things that have been advised beyond just, reducing our meat consumption. There's things around the tax around flying and aviation, producing less fossil fuel imports and switching to more renewable power, upgrading the grid. There's a lot of other advisories collectively that moves us towards a net zero future. There is a few, of course, we can go down the route of, they can't eat the kebab anymore, but there's far more other things at play than just the kebab meat.
Meanwhile, Donald Trump, that man again, is just laughing at all this. Drill, baby, drill. You're not telling me that his cabinet are going to chow down on some quinoa. This is a red meat country leading the way, and if we had half a brain about us, we'd be drilling ourselves.
I come from an energy industry background. I work for a data intelligence company, Mapstand, as well. And what we are seeing is that what's happening in America is actually quite short-term thinking. It's not long-term thinking. Whereas in places in China, you're seeing a lot of innovation and green innovation because there is a huge economic opportunity.
Yeah, because they're selling it all to the West and polluting their atmosphere. We're offshoring our carbon footprint, and they're selling the solar panels back to us because we're the mugs.
We're also able to be the producers and also change our own energy so that we can also compete.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome back. It's 4:39 with me, Martin Daubney, here on GB News. Now, despite promising to fix the foundations of the economy, at today's spring statement, the Chancellor Rachel Reeves announced growth would be halved this year. We can now speak with the former Liberal Democrat Minister, John Pugh. John, welcome to the show. So the Chancellor boldly told us we'd all feel 500 quid a year better off. Do you think her numbers add up?
No, I don't. Can I correct you first? I was never good enough to be a minister and didn't behave myself well during the coalition years.
Good. So you weren't a former minister, but you are actually on the tally now. Do her numbers add up?
I don't think so, no. I think the real problem is a cautionary tale, isn't it? She was predicating the whole Labour strategy, economic strategy, on growth. She did something in the budget, the national insurance increase, that basically torpedoed growth. And now she's working very hard to rectify that mistake. I mean, there are some things that the government have been confronted with which they didn't expect, like Donald Trump demanding the West bear the Europe bear a greater burden of the defence budget. But she isn't a fix. And so she's led into doing things which maybe probably need doing in the long term, like reducing the social service budget a little bit, but which she's doing in haste and doing very crudely.
Do you think it's going to wash with the public much longer that Rachel Reeves is blaming Donald Trump, blaming Vladimir Putin, blaming Ukraine, blaming global uncertainty, the world has changed, blaming anybody but themselves? John.
Hi.
John, did you hear the question? I asked there, do you think it's going to wash with the public that the Chancellor today blamed an uncertain world, changing world, blamed Putin, blamed Trump, blamed Ukraine, blamed anybody but the Labour Party and her own decisions?
Well, these are factors that certainly play into the economic scene, and certainly Donald Trump has done nothing to help it. But Rachel Reeves, to some extent, is the architect of her own problems. I mean, national insurance increase was meant to be a sort of tax that had no impact, it had no rebound. But in lots of towns across the country, we're seeing businesses close down precisely because of that. Her desire to sort of not use any form of taxation that she forswore during the election period has left her in a very, very difficult situation. And a stealth tax like the national insurance tax has rebounded badly on her.
John Pugh, you must admit that there must be a Brexit benefit we can both delight about, and that is if there are tariffs on the European Union, well, we're not in the European Union anymore. John, you must finally be saying hallelujah for Brexit.
Well, absolutely not. I think as Daisy Cooper said in the House of Commons, business is bearing a huge cost and the civil service is bearing a huge cost through all the extra formalities they now have to go in order to trade with Europe. So I think Brexit has fed into the problem as well. And in fact, I think the OBR are saying that as well, are they not?
Well, the OBR are hardly the most pro-Brexit place going. Earlier on...
but they're meant to be independent and objective and fair-minded.
Yeah, they're meant to be, yeah. They are meant to be independent, you're right. Richard Tice, a Brexiteer, of course, earlier on read the report and he said he thinks the OBR are on magic mushrooms.
Well, the OBR are set up as a great oracle and they were introduced by George Osborne to make accurate forecasts. In practice, their forecasts have been no better than the Treasury used to make in the past. And actually, the Treasury had no need to get their forecasts wrong because they had to live with the consequences.
We just see live pictures on our screen now. We're expecting the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, to give a statement at Downing Street early. We'll cross to that live as we get it. Well, I still got you there, John. Are the Liberal Democrats still clinging to the driftwood that the salvation of our nation will be rejoining the European Union?
Well, that's not the entire story, and it's not the only thing Liberal Democrats say, though. It's often the only thing you've heard us say. We need to get into industrial productivity up. Everybody sees it as a huge challenge to the British economy. We need to be a more productive economy. I think Rachel Reeves wants the same thing. Everybody wants the same thing. It's knowing how to achieve it.
OK, thank you very much for joining us. And that is the Liberal Democrat, John Pugh. Thanks for joining us on GB News. And as I said, we'll be crossing to Rachel Reeves as she appears. Let's get some reaction quickly from my panel. Nigel Nelson, Brexit keeps coming up. Who'd have thought there's Liberal Democrats talk about Brexit more than I do? Are they serious?
Which is difficult.
Yeah, but are they serious? Are they absolutely serious? I mean, they'll never get into power. This is folly. Well, but are they serious about the fact that rejoining the European Union is the way forward? And why can't they just accept that that the European Union will be getting these tariffs from America? We won't. Even you admit that's a clear Brexit bonus.
I thought it was. Yes, it is a Brexit bonus. The fact that we have a chance. We have a chance of avoiding tariffs. Absolutely. However, there are other sides of Brexit which are not so welcome. We've talked about inflation this afternoon. Food prices have gone up about 25% in the last 3 years. Now, out of that, about 7% of that is due to Brexit.
Food prices have gone up across the continent as well.
That's not true. Not even slightly. A, the EU has higher food prices than the UK, and B, we haven't put any costs on the imports. We still haven't done that. No, but a lot of farmers think we should have.
The point I'm making is within that 20, we may well have cheaper food than Europe. The point I'm making is within that 25%, there is a Brexit cost within that. There's a whole host of areas where Brexit has actually cost us money. But the big one is tariffs.
OK, Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, is speaking. Let's cross over.
Government's mission in a changing world. That is why we have invested in our NHS to cut waiting lists for 5 months in a row.
why we are rolling out breakfast clubs in every primary school in England, and why we are increasing the minimum wage by £1,400 for someone who works full-time from next week. But I know that it's not enough. The cost of living crisis is still very real for people in Britain. Global instability is holding back prosperity across the world, and countries across Europe are rightly having to spend more on defence. That is why today I have spelled out how we are going further and faster in delivering our plan for change. We are strengthening our nation's defences with £2.2 billion as a further down payment on our plans to deliver defence spending worth 2.5% of GDP by April 2027. We are seizing the opportunities of a changing world with a commitment to make Britain a defence industrial superpower, to create jobs, prosperity and opportunity in every corner of Britain. And we are getting Britain building again, with our plans to build 1.5 million new homes. The plan for change is working. The Office of Budget Responsibility has today revised down economic growth for this year, but it has upgraded growth for next year and every year after that. The economy will be larger at the end of the forecast than predicted in October. Our planning reforms alone will add £6.8 billion to the size of our economy by 2029-30. And real household disposable incomes, the money in people's pockets, will rise by £500 a year per person on average. There are no quick fixes, no shortcuts to prosperity, but we have returned stability to our economy. We have brought back security for working people, and we are delivering national renewal. Thank you very much. Right, I think I'm taking some questions. I'll start with Faisal from the BBC.
Sorry, Chancellor, thank you. The OBR has said that as a result of your welfare changes, that 250,000 people will be pushed into poverty. Is that a price worth paying for the rise in interest costs? And especially at this point, could you justify £1 billion tax giveaway to the biggest tech multinationals in the world, or even contemplate it at a moment when so many more people are going to go into poverty?
Thank you very much for that question, Faisal. As the OBR have also set out, they haven't accounted for any change in the number of people who are on benefits today who will go into work. And they set out in the document that they produced today that they're going to do some work ahead of the budget in the autumn to analyse our plans, the £1 billion of investment that we're putting in to have guaranteed personalised and tailored support for people to get back into work. And so we're confident that the changes that we are making and the support that we're providing to get people into work will result in more people having fulfilling careers, paying decent wages, and of course that's the best way to lift families out of poverty. In terms of tax policy, it's up to the UK government to set tax policy for the UK economy, including the digital services tax. Now, the digital services tax was supposed to be temporary until there was a global agreement as part of Pillar 1 and Pillar 2 of the OECD agreement, but we believe that companies should pay tax in the countries in which they operate, which is why we introduced the digital services tax in the first place, and our views on that have not changed. Anushka Astana from ITV.
Thank you, Chancellor. What do you say to those who say your obsession with meeting self-imposed fiscal rules are punishing the most vulnerable?
Well, look, there's nothing progressive and there's nothing Labour about losing control of the public finances. That's what the previous government did, and that saw mortgage rates, rents go through the roof. It saw prices increase. And it wasn't the wealthy who paid the price for that. It was ordinary working people and those on fixed incomes. So you call the rules self-imposed, but of course markets impose discipline, and it is important to provide an anchor for people to know that this government will ensure that we are not living beyond our means and borrowing more than we can afford. And today, because the Tories doubled the national debt, we are spending £105 billion per year on debt interest costs. That's more than we spend on defence, the Home Office and the Ministry of Justice combined. So that's why this government wants to reduce debt and reduce the deficit so that we can spend more on the people's priorities rather than more in servicing those debt to interest costs. Beth Rigby from Sky.
Thank you, Chancellor. October was meant to be a once-in-a-generation budget. When you raised 40 billion in taxes, you said to people, I'm not coming back for more. But you have come back for more today. You've come back in the form of 14 billion of spending cuts. Is it time for you to level with people and admit that your plan hasn't protected them? And the truth is that you are going to have to come back for more tax rises or spending cuts in the budget in October unless you change your fiscal rules. Thanks.
The budget last October was a once-in-a-generation budget. It was needed to wipe the slate clean after 14 years of economic mismanagement and specifically the failure of the previous government to have done a spending review for so many years. And so we did have to make a number of difficult decisions on tax and welfare and on spending in the budget last year. But we have now wiped the slate clean. We'll never have to do a budget like that again. There's lots of speculation that I was going to change taxes today. The Tories were desperate to call this an emergency budget. It was far from it. We have found efficiencies in public spending. We've shifted money from ODA to defence. And of course, one of the ways that we restored the headroom was the fact that the OBR have scored one of our planning reforms, which not only results in the economy being £6.8 billion bigger by the end of the forecast, but has also provided £3.4 billion that we can use to restore that headroom. And I think that just goes to show that what I said during the election was that you can't tax and spend your way to prosperity. The previous government only knew tax and spend. They didn't know growth. We are growing the economy. The OBR have revised up every year after this one for growth and forecast that the economy will be bigger than they were envisaging in October.
So you're not coming back for more?
Well, I'm not going to write 4 years' worth of budgets. I've just delivered a spring statement today, but I think you can see through this spring statement how determined I am, how determined this government is to live within the means that we set ourselves in the budget last year and to grow our economy, because that is the way to sustainably improve living standards and have the money that we need for our public services. Ryan from The Sun.
Chancellor, more than three-quarters of that national insurance hike is set to be passed on to employees through lower wages. Is it fair to say that that rise really is a tax on working people?
Well, wages are rising at almost twice the rate of inflation. Of course, inflation fell today for the data that was published for February, while at the same time wages are increasing by 5.9%, and that's been happening for the last few months. So already working people are seeing increases in what they're taking home every month. And from next week, the national living wage goes up by 6.7%. That amounts to a pay rise worth £1,400 for somebody who works on the national living wage full time, and that's 3 million people. So people are beginning to see in their pay packets extra money there. And of course, the OBR forecast today that by the end of this Parliament, the real household disposable income per person is set to be £500 higher than the plans we inherited from the previous Conservative government. So far from people's wages falling, as you're suggesting, wages, living standards, incomes are going up. And that's so important, because I want families to have more of their own money in their pockets to spend on the things that they want to do. Joe from Bloomberg.
Chancellor, the IPS's Paul Johnson says that the £10 billion of headroom you've given yourself against your main fiscal rule leaves you once again at the mercy of events. So can you just talk us through why you didn't give yourself more headroom? And aren't we now going to face months of speculation about what taxes you might have to increase, and that'd be bad for the economy?
So when I became Chancellor, the plans that I inherited from the previous government, it had just £6.5 billion headroom. That was the lowest headroom that a Chancellor had ever given himself, had given the government, had given the country at a budget. In autumn last year, I increased the size of the headroom by around 50% to take it to £9.9 billion. And despite the fact that, as the OBR have said, three-quarters of the deterioration in the headroom reflects higher government
borrowing costs, similar to what you're seeing in Germany and France. We've managed to restore all of the headroom today. There were some people who said, oh, you can wait until the autumn to restore the headroom, but I've been really clear. Stability is the #1 priority of this government, because that's how you bring the growth back to the economy. So we restored the headroom in full today. So people should have no doubt about my commitment and how seriously I take the fiscal rules. As I said today, they are non-negotiable. George Parker from the FT.
Chancellor, April the 2nd has been described as Liberation Day by the US President Donald Trump. How damaging would it be to the UK economy if a full-scale global trade war was unleashed on April the 2nd? And how confident are you that we might be able to negotiate a deal with the Trump administration to spare Britain from some of the worst effects of those tariffs?
Well, the OBR have set out today in their documents some different scenarios for what tariffs might mean for the UK economy. I think all of us were very pleased when our Prime Minister went to Washington just a few weeks ago to have those initial meetings with the US President. The last time Donald Trump was President of the United States, trade and investment flows between our two countries increased. 1 million British people work for American firms, and 1 million Americans work for British firms. So you can see how closely our economies are intertwined, and tariffs between our economies, increased tariffs between our economies, will damage both of our economies, and we'll continue to make those make that case for free and open trade. And let's see where we get to in the next few weeks. But I recognise how important free and open trade is, not just with the United States, although they are our biggest single trading partner, but also with the EU. And that's why I'm pleased that the summit between the UK and the EU has been organised for May this year, because we also want better trade flows between us and our nearest neighbours in Europe, particularly to help small businesses who have been tied up in red tape since the botched Brexit deal that the previous government did. Right, got time for a couple of more questions. Lady there in the second row.
Thank you, Chancellor. Jessica Frank Hughes from City AM. The Office for Budget Responsibility has said the government's trade employment rights bill is likely to have net negative economic impacts on employment, prices and productivity. Are you concerned the OBR might downgrade the UK's growth forecast based on the bill? And what do you say to those who warn this goes against your efforts to get more people into jobs?
As we grow the economy, we want ordinary working people to benefit, and that's why we are banning exploitative zero-hour contracts, fire and rehire, and also it's why we are increasing the national living wage, because we want to incentivise people to go into work and for that work to offer the security and dignity that should come from employment. Now, the OBR haven't put anything in their forecast today about the Employment Rights Bill because it's still working its way through Parliament, but we're confident that it will result in ordinary working people having more money in their pockets, but also having the security to spend that money because they don't have to worry from week to week whether they'll be in work or how many hours they'll get. Lady there.
Harriet Line, Daily Mail. Your welfare cuts will plunge 250,000 people into relative poverty, but at the same time you've accepted lavish freebies, including £600 tickets in a VIP box to watch Sabrina Carpenter. Do you regret accepting those tickets, and will you repay the money?
The 250,000 people is based on absolutely no one going into work who was previously out of work, and yet we're putting £1 billion in for targeted employment support to get people back to work. So I'm confident that our plans, far from increasing poverty, will actually result in more people having fulfilling work, paying a decent wage to lift themselves and their families out of poverty. Now, it may come as a surprise to some of you that I'm not personally a huge Sabrina Carpenter fan, being a 46-year-old woman, but a member of my family did want to go and see that concert. I'm not in a position now that I can easily just go and sit in a concert, and some of the things that I might have been able to do in my everyday life in the past are not so easy now. And so I had advice that it would be better to be in a box. The owners of the O2 had a box, tickets that are not available to buy, and they said that I could go in there, and that was better for security reasons. I do recognise that people think that that's a bit odd, but that's the reason why I did that, rather than just being in normal seats, which, to be honest, for me and my family would have been a lot nicer and a lot easier. Right. Yeah, gentleman there. There's no mic, so just stand up.
Oh, sorry. Emilio from Politico.
So you're so unused to being asked, you don't even...
No, I don't know how these things work. Thank you. Yesterday, the government gave planning approval for the Lower Thames crossing. I was reading about a Chinese company that's building a massive underwater tunnel in just over a year. They've done the bit under the water already in about 110 days. Since you want to build stuff faster and get growth faster, why don't we ask these Chinese guys to come along and show us how it's done?
I don't think it's the fact that it's a Chinese company. I think it's probably more to do with the fact that they don't have such onerous rules around bats and newts and frogs or whatever. And so that's why we're reforming our planning system to make it easier to build in Britain. Now, that Lower Thames crossing, as I said in my speech in January, I do want private finance to help build that. But the best way we can get it build is to back the builders, not the blockers, and get through that bureaucracy that currently holds back far too much investment, whether it is transport, energy or indeed housing. I'll just take maybe one more question. Yeah.
I'm Natasha Clark from LBC. Yesterday, the Deputy Prime Minister told LBC that she thought taxation was at a sweet spot. Do you agree with that?
Well, look, we had to make difficult decisions in the budget last year, including increasing taxes on some of the wealthiest and also asking businesses to pay more in tax. That was necessary to put our public finances back on a firm footing and also to properly fund our public services. I think the most important thing is that when people pay money in tax, that we treat it with the respect that we would treat our own money. And for too long, that hasn't happened, whether it is COVID contracts that went to friends and donors of the Conservative Party, whether that was a bloated bureaucracy, quangos getting out of control. And I'm determined that when we ask people to pay tax to fund public services, it actually goes to people's priorities. More money in the NHS, more money in our schools, and crucially in the changed world that we face today, more money in our defence. Thank you very much.
OK, that was the Chancellor Rachel Reeves there addressing British media at Downing Street. After her spring statement, she was asked about planning, asked about a potential tax on American companies, asked about headroom, fiscal headroom, asked about lower wages. Was the national insurance tax actually a tax on workers because workers will get lower pay rises? She was asked about welfare cuts, and she was asked bizarrely about the Lower Thames crossing and also about those free Sabrina Carpenter tickets, which she still hasn't quite apologised for. She was asked to apologise and didn't. Let's get some reaction now from my panel. I'm joined in studio by the senior political commentator at GBNews, Nigel Nelson, and the free markets economist and the fellow at the Centre for Brexit Policy, Catherine McBride. Nigel, I'm going to come to you first. Chancellors aren't renowned for setting the world on fire in terms of their delivery.
No, they should be more like bank managers.
Yeah, she's let's face it, she's no Sabrina Carpenter. She actually, I felt there, was going straight to pre-prepared sound bites, felt quite robotic, and I don't really remember much that she said. Am I being unfair?
Well, she's great fun in private, by the way.
Oh,
so
matron. Anyway, go on.
So I think you are being a little unfair. There's a lot that she's just done a spring statement. Very difficult to then start making budgets going forward. So the standout to me that she was asked whether she will have to come back for more tax rises or spending cuts in the October budget. She fudged that question. I understand why she did. One I find a bit weirder was that you'd mentioned earlier about 250,000 people being thrown into poverty by these measures. She says that doesn't take into account those who will who will go into work in the meantime. Well, I think a study should have been done about that. She says that the OBR won't be reporting on that until October, when the next budget comes through. We should have those facts and figures now.
Catherine McBride, she talked there about something that you've pulled out of the OBR report, and that was the potential impacts of trade tariffs, the trade war from America. There are 3 scenarios there. And are you convinced about her take on tariffs, first of all? Did anything leap out of that statement there that set your world on fire?
Well, I was very pleased that she was completely straightforward, that a trade war would be no good for the UK, and we really don't want to do that. You know, the US is our biggest trading partner, individual country, for both goods and services, and we need to keep that relationship. The OBR is much less enthusiastic about it, even in their first scenario where they think that the US only puts tariffs on Canada, Mexico and China. they think that our GDP is going to drop for some reason, which is stupid, because both Canada and Mexico are members of the CPTPP. So if they've got excess aluminium to sell, they can shift it here. And meanwhile, if we continue to keep our relationship with the US, then we can continue to sell the same stuff we do to the US. The second scenario is where the US also puts tariffs on us.
Yep.
That could hit 3 industries very hard. It'll be our cars. 80% of our cars are exported, and the US takes about a quarter of them, and they take our expensive ones. They take the Range Rovers, the Rolls-Royce, the Bentleys, Aston Martins, all of those guys. So that would make them more expensive, but sometimes that end of the market benefits. The more expensive it is, the more people want it. It's more prestigious. But the plastics and the pharmaceuticals and the petrochemicals, they are going to move to the US, because why would they not? The US is 40% of their exports.
OK, thank you very much to both of you. Now, let's cross live now to Downing Street to speak to GBNews' political editor, Christopher Hope, who was in that statement. Chris, what's your reaction? You were in the room and we were struggling to stay awake here.
She seemed quite relaxed. I had my question all lined up for the Chancellor. She kept looking at me and then chose not to call GB News for whatever reason. I was going to ask her the question about this issue of increase in spending, cost of living next week. How is that weighed off by the £500 better off message by 2029 we hear from the Chancellor? But never mind, we will keep asking questions of government and hope one day they'll call us for these questions. I was struck, I think, by the answer on this freebie that's been dogging her for about 2 weeks now. Going to the Sabrina Carpenter. She said there that it looked a bit odd, but she was given the box by the owners of the O2 for security reasons, and she's not a big fan of Sabrina Carpenter. She's a 46-year-old woman, but instead she said she's obviously being nagged by a member of her family to take her. She won't say who that was. It may have been a daughter or a son. We don't know. But anyway, she gave a defence of that, but wouldn't say she paid the money back, which has been so difficult for many to understand. She also said about the issue of the changes in this spring statement, pushing 250,000 people into poverty. She says that the OBR, the government forecasters, haven't priced in whether those individuals get a job, get into work. And I think that's why we've seen earlier Darren Jones, who's the Chief Secretary of the Treasury, he's comparing it to taking away pocket money from a child and then the child getting a job on Saturdays. It may seem a bit crass, frankly, to compare benefits to pocket money, but the point he's trying to make, I think, is that by withdrawing a support here, that you encourage them into work. I think that's where this government's going. I thought there's some welcome news maybe for us all on the issue of tariffs. The OBR is saying that if the tariffs go badly for the UK, it will wipe out the headroom, the spare money that the UK has to cope with the buffeting of world events. Now, she said that, she again made the point, there's 1 million people Brits who work for US companies, 1 million Americans over here working for British companies, and she says she hopes she can get a deal, some form of mini trade deal, mini economic framework deal with the US agreed, and that may negate the issue of being struck by tariffs. Tariff day next week, when of course we're seeing tariffs imposed on a whole range of areas by the US government, and the UK could be in his eyeliner for that.
Do you know, something else that struck me about that press conference then, Chris, is that a lot of the journalists were asking big questions about predictions, OBR reports, fiscal headrooms, but the question that people really wanted to ask was the one that you should have asked if you got a nibble there, and that is, you nailed it earlier on, this £500 a year, we're all told we're going to feel better off. I've had about 700 emails during the show. Nobody feels better off. Everybody is feeling the pinch, and Chris, you've got those numbers there about that £500 so-called mythical pay rise is going to be wiped out. Run through those figures again for the benefit of people who didn't catch you earlier on about how you believe that £500 will simply be wiped out.
Well, I would have run through them for the Chancellor if she'd taken my question and said she looked away each time my hand was in the air. Energy bills up by £111, council tax £109, water bills £123. These are average increases. Car tax a £5, broadband £36, TV licence a £5, rail fares up 4.6%, notwithstanding national insurance 2%, of course, and freezing those income tax thresholds, pulling a lot more people who shouldn't be, frankly, paying the high rate of income tax into that bracket. That's not talked about. I was trying to raise the issue there with the Chancellor. She chose not to take the answers, but without the question. But we're still trying to get the answers for our viewers and for you, Martin Daubney.
And Chris Hope, you know, maybe that's why the question wasn't taken, because, you know, that all this theory, all this fiscal headroom, all this trade tariff stuff, it's great, but people care about the pounds and the pence in their pocket, and I don't think she was pushed hard enough on that point. Chris Hope, that's why you're the best in the business. Next time, you get a nibble, mate.
Yeah, I mean, I hope so. To be fair to the Chancellor, today is a spring statement. It's not meant to be a tax-raising event. That comes in November. So we have basically got a kind of an idea. We're going to halve growth this year. Inflation goes up and the rest. But next year and going forward, growth is a lot stronger. So essentially, it's about a kind of an overarching theme, an arc, if you like, a canvas being painted here by the Chancellor. That's what she's trying to do. But we want to know for our viewers what it means for them. And next week is a cost of living hell for so many of them, and those are the questions we're trying to ask the government.
That's it, of course. April the 6th is the date when all of these risers kick in. And Chris Hope, just so people tuning in now understand, you're presenting GB News tonight at 7 p.m. Chris, you're going to have all of the inside analysis on this. You've been superb today, Chris Hope. Thank you very much, and I'll see you later on today. We've got some live pictures now on screen. It is Volodymyr Zelensky and Emmanuel Macron. They are meeting in person. We can see there live pictures. Zelensky being received by Macron in Paris. Live pictures on your screen, and we'll bring you more details from that story as they emerge. Now, let's get back now to my studio and the spring statement. And I'm delighted to say I'm joined in the studio in Westminster by the Labour MP, Dan Tomlinson, and the founder of the British Hair Consortium, Toby Dicker. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. Dan, I'm going to start with you. You heard there, we're going through some of the detail of the numbers. People really, really care about the pounds and the pence in their pocket. Really, that's what matters. The fiscal headroom, all this kind of jiggery-pokery, great. People care about, do they feel better off today as compared to yesterday? It came as something as a revelation to us on the channel, and certainly to thousands of people at home, when they were told they're going to be £500 a year better off. It simply doesn't add up. We just went through the numbers there. Energy bills, 111 quid. Council tax, 88 councils are going up by the maximum permissible 4.99%. That's going to hammer people. Water bills, 123 quid. TV licence, bus fares, you name it. And less chance potentially of a pay rise because of national insurance hikes by your Chancellor. Do you think these numbers add up with the great British public?
Let me start by saying I'm in politics to try and make sure that people in my constituency, that people in everyday families across the country can be better off. I grew up in a family where we have very little money. I know what it's like to struggle to get by, and that motivated me to get into politics to try and fix things. I worked on the economy as a researcher, trying to figure out how we can fix our economy before I became an MP, and I really want to try and make as many improvements as we can so people watching your programme can have more money in their pockets at the end of the month. Now, on your £500 point, Chris did mention lots of costs, and there are cost increases coming, but the OBR, the independent watchdog, has taken all of them into account, and their measure is household income per person, and they say, once you take account of the increase in wages that they are projecting will happen, the fact that prices aren't going to be going up as much in the future as they were, you know, up by they say, all told, £500 is the amount that is the extra income for people.
Whose wages are going up? Public sector wages are going up because Labour gave away 47 billion quid. Well, wages are going up if you're a train driver. 675 million quid the Labour Party gave away. So junior doctors, £2.5 billion. Public sector pay rises. Happy days. I'm not getting any feedback from our viewers getting a pay rise. I haven't had a pay rise any time ever.
Last time I checked, which admittedly wasn't in the very latest data, but I have looked just recently because someone asked me this question. Actually, wages are rising faster in the private sector than in the public sector at the moment in this economy. And we do need to do more to turn things around. Look, years and years ago, before we had the Tories, and I'm not going to get too party political, wages in this country went up on average by 4% a year and prices went up by 2%. And we all felt a bit better in our pockets at the end of the year. That hasn't happened for too long. We've got to turn that around. I know come the next election, if we haven't done that, people will look at us and they'll think nothing has changed. So we know we've got to turn that around. It's good news that the OBR has said that there's going to be that bump up. It's good news that we've been able to make sure we can continue to invest in our public services. And there are some difficult decisions, but they've enabled us to do things like make sure that this winter, even in the depths of winter, something that's unheard of in recent years took place, and every single month's waiting list in our NHS fell the last 5 months because we'd made those decisions to invest in the health service.
OK, thank you very much. I'll come back to you in a moment on some other points, but now let's bring in Toby Dicker, of course, the founder of the British Hair Consortium. You're one of the businesses that's going to be hit very hard by the national insurance hike. You have a lot of employees on lower wages. The cost of taking staff on is going to increase, part-time staff. There's going to be lots and lots of barriers, people cutting back on luxuries because of the cost of living crisis. How damaging do you think the budget is going to be on April the 6th when this kicks in for the hair industry? And how afraid are people you talk to in your industry about the future?
Yeah, look, let's put this in context. Every administration we've ever talked to has not understood our industry, has not understood that when you add value through labour, you are more taxed than anyone else on the high street. So if you have high labour costs, 60% in our business, and you pay VAT, then you pay way, way more tax. The previous administration didn't listen to a word we said, and this administration smashed the final nail in the coffin of employment in our sector. All we want is them to sit down and listen to us and understand that if you're a small business on the high street in the UK, all of the decisions that have been made are extraordinarily damaging. And I'm not just blaming this administration, but you have to sit down with us. You can't just give us trite responses like, oh, we've permanently reduced rates. Permanently reducing rates means you've actually reduced the cost to 40% reduction. That is an increase for every small business in this country of 2.4 times. I paid 10 grand VAT last year. I paid 24,000 in this coming year. So to say and expect small businesses in this country to take all of the tax burden was a mistake. And I hope that the administration start listening to those things. I understand taxing big business. I understand doing those things. But creating a budget that makes businesses deliberately remove employment, which they haven't expected, and that's exactly what's going to happen in our sector. 90,000 people are going to lose their jobs, and 10,000 apprentices won't be here anymore. They'll go into self-employment, and OK, they're still employed, they're still workers, but all of that tax that would have been coming in has been lost. And we gave this government a solution through our report that said, we will put more tax in, we will help you grow. All we're asking is for the opportunity for the administrations to listen and sit down with us. And that's what's frustrating. HMRC have failed us for 5 years. That's not the fault of this government, but increasing national insurance on an industry that has 5 times more employment than traditional retail means that we pay a burden of 5 times more. Understand that different businesses have different tax burdens, because otherwise you're going to just see complete wipeouts of certain sectors.
Dan Thompson, when you hear that kind of feedback, and absolutely clear there's not just putting the blame on the Labour Party, previous administrations, he said, weren't particularly helpful either. But at the sharp end, where reality bites, where the rubber hits the road, national insurance hikes, all of the hikes that have been proposed or have been proposed by the Chancellor are having a devastating impact on small businesses like hairdressers. And we constantly heard these are not taxes on working people, but do you accept they are? If staff are having to be laid off, if pay rises can't go ahead, this is a tax on working people, and as a consequence, people could lose their jobs.
I'm not going to shy away from the fact that in the budget last year, we had to make some decisions that were difficult to make, that will be difficult for some businesses. But we had to make sure that we raised the revenue to fund our public services. We're doing good things to try and make sure we get value for money. Some of your viewers may have noticed that we've said we're going to abolish NHS England, which is not the NHS itself. Yep. It's the quango that sits on top of it that duplicates all the functions of the Department of Health. We're trying to make sure we can reform our public sector so we can get value for money. But we also did have to find a way to raise some revenue. We didn't touch VAT. We didn't touch income tax. We did have to make that decision on employers, national insurance. We've got to do all we can to help businesses to grow and expand. I totally agree. We've got to go further when it comes to business rate reform. And also, one of the things that the OBR did say today in their document is that we did the biggest free revenue raiser ever. So the reforms that we've made to planning, which should help it be a bit more easier for things to get built in this country, should have a positive impact on both young people being able to get on the housing ladder, but also hopefully the rents for some of our high street businesses not being as high as they have been over time. That's some of the things that we want to see so that we can see our economy grow and money flow into the Treasury. The OBR say these reforms to the planning system are going to bring in an extra £3 billion that we can spend on good things as well.
OK, gentlemen, we have to leave it there. A passionate exchange of ideas. Thank you both very much for joining me today in the studio on Spring Statement Day. And that's the Labour MP Dan Tomlinson and the founder of the British Hair Consortium, Toby Dickon. I wish you the very, very best of luck. I really, really do. Thanks, guys, for joining me today in the studio. Now, next, I'll be speaking to a furious farmer who feels let down by the Chancellor's Spring Statement. Stick with me here, Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's News Channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Hi, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and my show is your opportunity to cut through all the noise and dive in headfirst to some robust debates. Ideas clash.
Situation, isn't it? Because the failure is...
You're deliberately avoiding my point. Nothing's held back.
And if you think this is the end of it, wait for more.
And we do not shy away from the difficult stuff. Sometimes I want to shake people and say, if only you understood. So join me on Jubes & Co. weeknights at 6 p.m, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent? I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there short and it did nothing.
It's controversial. And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born. It's everything you need to kickstart your evening. Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it. That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more.
Whether it's breaking royal news, please bring us up to date, or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons.
Very, very curious.
We bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back, 5:25 with me, Martin Daubney, here on GB News. Now, farmers are in fury today as Chancellor Rachel Reeves refused to U-turn on the family farm tax in today's Spring Statement. And meanwhile, the Prince of Wales is set to appear on an episode of Clarkson's Farm and has revealed that Prince George will be among the fans tuning in. Today, Prince William met with the star of the show, Caleb Cooper, as they spoke to young farmers in Somerset about mental health down on the farm. He was keen to raise the challenges the sector faces with His Royal Highness.
I think he gets it because, and I say this all the time, I mean, I explain everything in great detail because I don't think the general public necessarily understand where maybe their food comes from or how something is produced. So I'm used to explaining everything in great detail. And my little 4-year-old son who asks everything, why, and everything, I just go, that brick there come out of the ground one day and then it got chiseled up and then put it in great detail to put it into a building. So actually, as I started talking to Prince William, I started talking about, actually, I don't have to explain all this mental health stuff because he actually understands it and he's actually out here, you know, bringing up the awareness and making everyone aware of these problems. Farming's a challenge, and it's been for the last 10 years. I mean, I started farming when I was age 12, so I've seen it growing up, if that makes sense. So, I mean, it can be whatever the politics are going on in terms of day to day, or it could be the weather. There's so many different things that are changing, as well as then it could be a new disease that comes out for a crop. It could be a new disease that comes around for an animal or a chicken, for example. There's bird flu. It's so many challenges on a day to day that every farmer's got to deal with, and that's what I've always said. This farmers are really good problem solvers. And yes, okay, they may solve the problem, but then at the end of the day, they take that on board themselves. And that's where the stress comes from, and that's why mental health occurs in the farming industry a lot. So therefore, again, it's good to talk about it and hopefully raise awareness.
That's Caleb Cooper there on Clarkson's farm. Went from on minimum wage for years and years and years. Now the guy is a millionaire, one of farming's success stories. But let's join now an arable farmer, Andrew Ward. Andrew, great to see you again, my friend. The spring statement here, we've got a copy of it here. Not a single F word in it. And of course, I mean farming. Farmers not even mentioned at all today. Is that what you expected, and how does that make you feel?
And again, good to see you. In a way, yes, it's good. In some ways, that some of the things that we'd heard that they were going to be doing, like the abolishing the red diesel duty or the tax relief, that hasn't happened, which is good news. That'd have been catastrophic. Other things about extending the gifting period for inheritance tax, we heard that might happen. That hasn't happened. So there are some good news in it that we haven't heard. But the bad news is that the inheritance tax that we keep talking about, the agricultural property relief, that we was hoping there was going to be an amnesty for the elderly farmers, for the poorly farmers who aren't very well, who aren't going to live the 7 years. And we've been campaigning for this amnesty to happen. As you know, you've been very good at helping us with that, but there's been no mention of that at all. So everything we've been doing, promoting food and farming, promoting the lifelong industry and family businesses, as well as farming businesses and other businesses, just hasn't happened. So it's really disappointing that they haven't come back on anything that we've asked them to do.
And Andrew, another thing we've spoken about before with a degree of concern is that the entire economy, the entire growth in the OBR report seems to be built upon hitting housing targets. 1.5 million houses have to be built for this government to hit these growth targets. And you know, as well as I do, better than I do, that could involve compulsory land purchases from farmers like you, from farmers buying up their land at minimum prices by the state to hit these targets. Are you concerned that for the government to hit their growth targets, farmers like you and your colleagues could be seeing their land hoovered up by the state?
It's absolutely catastrophic, Martin. It's just horrendous that we think that can happen. And let's get to the bottom of this. Is this for people in the country, for British people or is it for immigrants who've come in this country illegally? Because we're hearing that's where a lot of these houses are for. And it's absolutely horrendous that land is going to be given up, good farmland, and we're not going to be paid true value for that land. And it's just horrendous. Another example of a land-grabbing government that's trying to take land away from agriculture, away from food production. And we've just heard this afternoon Rachel Reeves saying she wants to make everybody better. Everybody's going to be better off. Absolute rubbish. We're going to be worse off as a country. We've got businesses that are cancelling orders, cancelling investment because there's no certainty. We've got redundancies. We've got cafes closing. It's just horrendous for the whole country.
So Andrew Ward, the Chancellor, was very clear. We're all, each and every one of us, 500 quid better off. Are you 500 quid better off? Do you know any farmers that are 500 quid better off?
Absolutely not. And in farming especially has been hit so hard with everything. Myself, the farm, we have, in the budget, she announced that there will be a 76% reduction in D-link payments. This is the payments that from the EU were being scaled down gradually, and then the SFI was coming in to replace some of those. In my own case, that's £24,000 being knocked off. I've been taken away from me. The SFI has been capped. So there's no more applications for the sustainable farming incentive, which was going to be brought in to help us farmers, to help us transition. But don't forget here, Martin, it's not just going to be farmers that's suffering here when we have the removal of some of those payments. It's the environment and wildlife itself, because we need a profitable business and industry to look after the environment in the countryside. And it's the envy of the world and the envy of foreign tourists, because it's been cared and managed for. But it's been cared and managed for, costs a lot of money to do that, but we must be prepared and we must be recompensed for that.
Andrew Ward, no mention of farming today. And isn't it funny how you're almost glad there's no mention, because a lot of farmers were bracing themselves for that red diesel hike, which would have almost doubled your fuel costs. And we were speaking to farmers earlier this week on the show, Justin Rogers, Farmers to Action, telling us that would mean that he would just be simply blown out of business altogether. A lot of farmers would have been going to the wire. So, Andrew, we talk often on this channel, you and I, and often off the channel when we have a little bevy afterwards, about what does this mean next. You've been ignored today, and you talk often about what the action might be moving forward. You've been left out in the cold today. Might that precipitate how should we put it, a spicier approach to making sure that people like the Chancellor Rachel Reeves pays you attention?
It's a great way of putting it, Martin. We have to have a spicier approach now. We've been very British up to now. We've been very, very good, if you like, and done things the correct way. It's not working. I think what has worked, though, we've got a lot of public support, thanks to yourselves and the way it's all been conducted. I think that's great. The protests we've had, the last one, the pancake job in London on Pancake Day, great public support. So I think it has helped raise awareness of where food comes from. There's no doubt about that. But we do need to make it spicier now, and we will do. We're already looking to plan for the next stage, and that's what we'll do. If I could just touch one back thing, Martin, going back to red diesel, because of the rumour, I went along and bought last week some red diesel. I filled up my tank, 22,000 litres of diesel, that cost me about £15,000. I didn't need to spend that money. That has blown a hole in our budget, but because of the rumours, we had to do that. But we had enough diesel to last till harvest, but I couldn't risk the relief going, the tax relief going, so I spent £15,000 unnecessarily. It's just horrendous that we're running an industry, we're running the country on rumours and hearsay and scaremongering. It's just unreal.
Although, if there were to be a rumour, I don't know, about food shortages that potentially could come, then you might get people not buying up all the red diesel they get their claws on, but buying up all the food products they could get their claws on, and that might send potentially a message to the government.
Well, it could very well do that, Martin, and you're dead right on that. We've got one product, bread. Bread has a very, very short shelf life, and it wouldn't create very much to create shortages of bread. It's a very, very delicate supply chain, and it wouldn't take a lot of doing to create that. We only have to look at toilet rolls and other products in COVID, how very quickly shelves became empty. So we're on a very precarious tightrope here, that if food shortages happen, the public needs to look out for this. They need to go to buy some bread, because very, very soon shelves could be empty.
There we go. You heard it here first. There could be food shortages. Andrew Ward, I know you've got the eye and the ear of the entire industry. You know, you've become like a linchpin of this, along with Ollie Harrison and Martin. What have people been telling you today about the spring statement? What kind of things are you hearing? So, in fact, Andrew Ward, I'm afraid we have to leave it there. JD Vance has just landed. Look, he's in his military outfit. He's in Virginia, going to a US Marines institution. Vice President JD Vance choppers in, landed in via the US presidential helicopter, meeting representatives of the US Marines, the armed forces. Of course, this follows off the back of some rather embarrassing leaks from a social media group, where plans to bomb Houthi rebels were leaked to a journalist, the editor of The Atlantic, who got that. JD Vance there in front of the US chopper. Let's go. He's about to speak. Let's go to Mark White, our Homeland Security editor. Mark White, what do we think is the purpose of this visit?
Well, we know, of course, he's going to be going to Greenland as well to cement perhaps the US relationship with that particular nation. In fact,
OK, Mark White, apologies. We're just getting an audio signal now with JD Vance. Let's listen to what he has to say.
How's that sound? So you all know how big of a part of the Marine Corps was of my life and how important it was for me. And I just wanted to say from the bottom of my heart, from one Marine to another, thank you for your service. We're proud of you, and I'm proud to be here with my fellow Marines. God bless you guys. Now, some of you may know that the Marine Corps actually, there are a lot of good things the Marine Corps did for me. When I joined the Marines back in 2003, you know, I was just a kind of directionless kid. I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. And as you all know, the Marine Corps is good at giving direction to 18-year-old kids. But it also saved me from making one of the worst financial decisions that I've ever made. And as you guys probably appreciate, there are often these, used car dealerships outside of Marine Corps bases. You know what I'm talking about? And I remember when I was probably a 19-year-old kid, I was going to buy a used Honda Civic at one of those used car dealerships. And the dealership was kind enough to offer me the low interest rate of 21% to buy that used car. And it was a Marine Corps gunnery sergeant, Gunny Arledge, who said, you know what? Why don't you stop being an idiot, go to Navy Federal Credit Union and get a better deal? And Gunny Arledge saved me from making a terrible mistake. And that's what the Marine Corps does. That's what you all do, from the NCOs to the officers here. You guys help form our young people into United States Marines. And that is, I think, the best thing the Marine Corps does for the United States of America. I'm proud of all of you. As General Chuck Krulak said, the Marine Corps does two things. It wins battles, it wins wars, and it makes Marines. And that's a pretty good damn thing to do for the United States of America. So I'm proud of you guys. I'm proud to be here. I'm proud of what you do. And most of all today, I'm proud that I think under new leadership, the Marine Corps and the entire United States military is headed in the right direction. And that's why I'm here today, to talk a little bit about what we're going to do, talk a little bit about President Trump's vision for the United States military. And importantly, after I do that and I serve some chow at the chow hall, I'm going to go shoot some guns, right? So here's the thing. Under President Trump's leadership, we believe in a very simple principle. We don't care who you are, where you came from. We don't care what skin color you are. We care about excellence, and we care about patriotism. And if you are awesome and you are a patriotic young Marine, then we are going to do everything that we can to make you the most lethal fighting force the world has ever seen. And that is what we're doing every single day. No more quotas. No more ridiculous mumbo-jumbo, no more diversity trainings. We believe the real strength and the real diversity in the United States Marine Corps is that you all come from every walk of life, come from every corner of America, and you have got the strength and the purpose to win the nation's wars, and that is what the Marine Corps is going to do, just like it's done for damn near 250 years. Now, speaking of that, as my dear friends, and as a lot of you know, well, maybe you don't, because a lot of young faces out here. That's the thing. I'm 40 years old now, and I realize that compared to when I joined the Marine Corps, I'm an old-ass man now. But here's the thing. The best friends that I've ever made in my life, I've made in the Marine Corps. People who came to my vice presidential inauguration and the president's inauguration just a couple of months ago are people that I first met in boot camp, or first met in follow-on school, first met at my first duty station. People who have held my children when they were little babies. People who I've helped welcome new children into the world. You guys have no idea that the people standing to your left and to your right, these are lifelong friends. They're going to follow you around, whether you want to or not, for the rest of your life. And I think that's one of the great blessings of the United States Marine Corps. And one of the things I learned from my great Marine friends, they remind me, is that this November, of course, our great Corps is going to celebrate 250 proud years. And as I know, because I've been to a few Marine Corps birthday balls myself, I'm sure it'll be a total sober no alcohol celebration for the Marine Corps' 250th birthday. But from one Marine to another, let me just say that we are excited to celebrate the Marine Corps' 250th anniversary, 250 years of winning wars, 250 years of kicking ass and taking names. So here's the basic plan. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to invest in the Marine Corps and the entire United States military.
Okay, you can now continue watching JD Vance on GBN2, talking there to US Marines in Virginia, reflecting on his own service as a Marine Corps. He said he's going to serve some chow and then shoot some guns. You can do that by scanning the QR code on your screen to get that. But first, we've got some major breaking news for you now. And Nigel Farage and NatWest Bank have settled their debanking dispute. And they said in a joint statement, the NatWest Group and Nigel Farage MP are pleased to confirm that they have resolved and settled their dispute. And the bank has apologised to Mr Farage. The terms of settlement are confidential. Just to repeat that breaking news, of course, the debanking scandal was another huge fight that Nigel Farage took on after taking on Brussels. Nigel Farage and NatWest have settled their debanking dispute. They said in a joint statement, the NatWest Group and Nigel Farage MP are pleased to confirm that they have now resolved and settled their dispute, and the bank has apologised to Mr Farage. The terms of the settlement are confidential. More details on that story as they come out later in the show. And, of course, on GBN Tonight with Christopher Hope. Plenty more to come throughout the rest of the show. But for now, if you're travelling home from work or from school, then here is your traffic and travel update. And don't forget to stay with us on digital and on radio.
Crash Law 24 sponsors GB News Traffic and Travel Report.
The latest GB News Travel.
Good afternoon, I'm Johnny Ratner. Well, long delays on Merseyside on the M53 northbound. 2 lanes on that 3-lane stretch, coned off junction 5 to 4. That's the Eastern Bebington stretch. Of course, there's an ongoing investigation. Emergency services are on the scene. On the M1, heading south towards Bedford from junction 14 to 13, the left lane's blocked off at the scene of a crash on the M3 northbounds as you head from Hampshire into Surrey. 1 lane's closed between Camberley and Lightwater for recovery work following a breakdown. And in Cornwall, just south of the Bodmin bypass, Launceston Road shut following an accident. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Crash Law 24 sponsors GB News Traffic and Travel Report.
Now, lots more still to come between now and 6 o'clock, including we'll be getting the latest reaction to the spring statement next from a chip shop owner. Yum.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial. And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born. It's everything you need to kickstart your evening. Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it. That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
Victims of an absolutely horrific and heartbreaking crime. Exactly 1 month ago, their home was broken into by machete-wielding thugs. Well, RAF officer Jason Shutt and his partner Sashi had £20,000 of cash and valuables taken from their property in Ruislip, West London, while Sashi was being held at Machete Point. Now, the armed gang also stole their beloved pug dog, Ozzy, you can see now on your screens. And the family said they aren't focused on getting the money, the jewellery or the watches back. They just want Ozzy back.
I followed myself through into the dining room area when I heard footsteps coming down the stairs. And at this point, they told me not to move. They had a machete around my neck, turned me and put me up against the bottom banisters. And while this was carrying on, the machete was still around my neck.
He's like a live teddy bear. He was just so cuddly, and he was so kind. He was like a human, but obviously as a dog. He was just amazing, and yeah.
We can see that dog on the screens there now, and the dog is now missing, and you obviously dearly would love to get Ozzy back. What can people do to help? Is there any distinctive marks, anything that may help the public out there to assist you in this noble search?
Yeah, well, he's got a scar on his back leg. Obviously, he'll reply to his name, Ozzy.
You can see on screen there, if you're watching at home, there is that distinctive mark. It looks like the back rear leg.
Yeah,
so the back right flank leg there, got that scar, beautiful pug. And I believe the local community have chipped in. They're trying their best to help you as well.
All over social media. They've been great.
GB News.
Hi, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and my show is your opportunity to cut through all the noise and dive in headfirst to some robust debates. Ideas clash.
Situation, isn't it?
No,
because the failure is
you're deliberately avoiding my point. Nothing's held back,
And if you think this is the end of it, wait for more.
and we do not shy away from the difficult stuff.
Sometimes I want to shake people and say, if only you understood.
So join me on Jubes & Co. weeknights at 6 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back, 5:46 for me, Martin Daubney, here on GB News. Now, for more reaction to today's announcement from the Chancellor, the £2.2 billion boost to defence. Let's bring in GB News' Home and Security Editor, Mark White. Mark, welcome to the show. £2.2 billion. We kind of knew this was coming. It's a token amount, but is it just a drop in the ocean? Won't go very far, will it?
Well, if the trajectory continues in that direction of more spending for the Ministry of Defence, then it's a good thing, but it's got to redress many years of hollowing out of our armed forces, where there are very serious structural issues now within the Ministry of Defence that have to be grappled with. But clearly the government has decided that it wants to raise defence spending to 2.5% of GDP, and ahead of that, Rachel Reeves announcing that extra 2.2 billion for next year, which will be ring-fenced, most of it, for new technologies and also for better accommodation for service personnel, which has got to be welcomed as well, because clearly there are many who are just leaving the services because of the appalling nature of the housing stock that they're forced to live in. But Rachel Reeves, you see her there alongside the Defence Secretary, looking at some of the drones, the new technology that she wants the armed forces developmentally at least to sort of focus on, was accentuating the positive, the fact that, OK, they are spending more on defence, which means other governmental departments might be squeezed, but there's a big upside, and that is that many more people will be employed in defence industries across the UK. And indeed, she said she wanted the UK to become a defence industry superpower. There are certainly big defence companies in the UK, BAE Systems among them, and of course BAE is currently building that new ballistic missile submarine for the nuclear deterrent. The Prime Minister was up there just last week launching HMS Dreadnought, the first of those ballistic missile submarines. And, you know, that town alone in Barrow and Furness employs more than 15,000 people. They took on 900 apprentices just last year. And it is almost a one-industry town. And it's growing all the time in terms of the numbers that this company in Barrow and Furness is now employing. And the government wants to try to replicate that to other locations like Glasgow, they said, and Derby and Newport. They also want to regenerate the military base in Portsmouth. So potentially some good news there. But Martin, a lot of it might depend on what happens over the other side of the Atlantic with Donald Trump and just how committed he is to the defence of Europe. And if he pulls away from that, we need to give even more in the way of military aid to Ukraine. It could in one fell swoop, just diminish what the government is trying to do in strengthening our own defence.
Superb stuff, Mark White. Excellent as ever. Thank you very, very much for joining us on the show. Now, moving on. Oh, my cod, because fish and chip shops say that the push to greener energy risks battering their businesses. And joining me now is the king of the chippies, Andrew Cook, president of the National Federation of Fish Fryers. Andrew, always an absolute delight to have you on the show. And I'm just delighted, as I say every time, that the National Federation of Fish Fryers is a thing and you exist. Thank you so much for your service and what you do. But on a serious point, is nothing sacred? Is nothing safe? From Ed Miliband, Mr. Windmill. Now he's making you boys go green, and that, you're going to tell me, spells the battering of the fish and chip industry. Tell me more.
Yeah, it's just one of these things where government really needs to engage with industry more. We're the experts in our field, and I think they make these changes. It's okay for the larger companies, the big nationals. They've got departments that are set up to handle move over to electric or to hydrogen power, whereas we've got to navigate it all ourselves. And it's just a lot for a small business to take on, let alone the cost of it, but the hassle of doing any changes. So we just hope government reach out to us and keep talking to us, because we're there to help, and we're not against change. We support going greener where we can. We're all about the environment, but it's got to be practical for us.
But Andrew, it's a no-brainer that the fastest way to get oil up to frying temperature is with gas. It works at an instant. You already have the gear. You're all set up. This is like forcing everyone to get rid of their gas boiler and get a heat pump, but it's like they're trying to force you to get rid of your gas fryers to go electric. Well, that means a huge amount of cost for every single British chip shop, which is already feeling the pinch, and everyone can already tell you fish and chip prices are going through the roof.
Yeah, it's an expense we could do without. I mean, the frying range behind me was £60,000. It's a big expense. I don't want to be changing it too soon. But, yeah, I mean, all these things, we have to move with the times, and things will change over time. But it's just got to be practical. It needs a bit of common sense and plenty of engagement with industry. And, we'll work with government where we can. But, some things might be cost prohibitive, and it could put businesses under. It's a lot of money to find for a small business.
And Andrew Cook, quickly, the Chancellor did a spring statement today. Of course, that's going to mean national insurance hikes for employers. It's going to mean minimum wage hikes. I'm assuming that could be grim reading for the fish and chip industry as well.
Yeah, independent hospitality is in crisis at the moment. I met with a small business minister yesterday, and I told him so. Government needs to talk to organisations like my own, and we can tell them where the real issues are, and hopefully they can start taking steps to support us. It's a real tough time for a small business, and I think the big thing for us would be VAT reduction, and that's the bit that's missing that stops many businesses being viable. So hopefully they're listening, and he picks the phone up and arranges a meeting with us all.
OK, absolutely superb to have you on, and thank you for everything that you do. You can't beat a good old British fish and chips. But can you believe that Ed Miliband wants to get his claws into our fish and chips? And astonishing. Thank you very much, Andrew Cook, president of the National Federation of Fish Fryers. As I keep saying, thank the God you are a thing. Thank you very, very much. Now, thanks for joining me on the show today. Now, up next is Michelle Dewberry, Jubes & Co., the queen of primetime debate. Here she is.
Hello, Martin. Well, firstly, thank you very much for that, because now you've made me absolutely starving hungry, and I just want to head off and go to the chippy and treat myself to that very dish that you've all just been talking about. But no, why not? Because we are in the studio, and what a treat for you tonight, because we have got a budget special. What's that you say? It wasn't a budget. It wasn't a fiscal event. It was a spring statement. I hear you. And I'll get lots of reaction on that tonight. I've got a live studio audience. I've got an absolutely fantastic panel for you. I've got 2 MPs, and I've got an economics expert. Who doesn't like an economic expert? I've got to ask you, though, ladies and gents, the key question is, we're apparently going to be £500 wealthier. Yes! But the key question is, do you actually believe it or not? I'll see you.
Heavy showers first thing will be followed by a warm, cosy day. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello again, I'm here with your latest GB News weather update from the Met Office. As we go through the next 24 hours or so, we are going to see some rain pushing into the northwest, but ahead of this, we still have some further fine, dry and warm weather to come because high pressure firmly in control. But yes, a front feeding into northwestern parts is going to bring increasing amounts of cloud and some rain as we go through into this evening and overnight. That rain spreading its way across many parts of Scotland, even pushing into Northern Ireland as well, and it could be quite heavy at times, quite persistent as well. Further south, mostly dry overnight, perhaps some thick cloud over northern and western parts of England and Wales, bringing a spot of drizzle, but lots of clear skies, especially towards the southeast, where it could turn quite chilly, temperatures dropping into low single figures. So in the south, first thing tomorrow morning, a fairly fine start for most of us. Yes, there will be some cloud around, perhaps even the odd pocket of mist and fog, but generally a lot of dry, bright weather to come. Further north and west, though, it's a cloudier story. Like I said, a few spots of drizzly rain over some parts of northern and western England and Wales. Lots of cloud, though, across parts of Northern Ireland and Scotland, and here some heavy persistent rain as well. Perhaps some brightness across the far north of Scotland, Orkney, Shetland, perhaps seeing some glimmers of sunshine, but also some showery outbreaks of rain. Then as we go through tomorrow, staying pretty cloudy, wet and even blustery at times across parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland. England and Wales, though, faring drier. Some drizzly rain perhaps for northern and western parts, but on the whole, a lot of fine weather to come, similar to today. Temperatures in the southeast peaking in the mid to high teens, 17, perhaps even 18 Celsius. That cloud and rain towards the northwest doesn't make a huge amount of progress southeastwards as we go through the end of the day tomorrow, but it is going to pep up a little bit and eventually push its way into England and Wales as we go through overnight and into Friday. And then while the outlook for the weekend is a bit mixed at times, temperatures are a little bit lower than recent.
There will be a light breeze in the morning, leading to a warm front. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Crash Law 24 sponsors GB News Traffic and Travel Report.
The latest GB News travel.
Good evening, I'm Johnny Ratner. Long delays in East Yorkshire for the M62. The motorway is blocked eastbound at junction 38. So this is just to the east of Haldon. It's at the scene of an accident. Meanwhile, on Merseyside on the M53, the motorway's down to a single lane northbound from junction 5 to 4 between Eastham and Bebington following a collision. And long queues in Essex heading towards London down the A12. The Brentwood bypass is partly blocked just before the M25 following an accident. Long queues halfway back to Chelmsford on the speed sensors. And that's the very latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Crash Law 24 sponsors GB News Traffic and Travel Report.
You could have £17,777 in tax-free cash to play with this spring. Cash to spend on anything you like. And if that wasn't enough, we're also going to give you not one, but two sought-after designer watches and the latest Mulberry handbag. How would winning that sound? For another chance to win the lot, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5